Move along, you are wasting my time.
I can fix it. I know exactly what's wrong.
She had spent $11 million trying to hear that engine roar again. 11 million, 5 years. 19 engineers flown in from 4 different countries, and still nothing but silence inside that glass garage. The red Ferrari sat there like a coffin, beautiful, untouchable, dead. Vanessa Whitmore was one of the most powerful women in America. She could buy anything, replace anything, rebuild anything, except this. And on the afternoon that changed everything, the man who finally solved what no expert could was the janitor eating a sandwich by the back gate. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The garage had its own kind of silence. Not the comfortable kind. Not the quiet of a Sunday morning or the stillness before rain. This was the silence of something wrong, something missing. The kind of silence that had weight to it, that pressed against your chest when you stood too close. Vanessa Whitmore had learned to avoid the garage. For the first 2 years after the Ferrari stopped running, she would still walk in sometimes. Stand beside it. Rest her palm flat against the hood, the way you might rest your hand on someone's shoulder when words weren't enough. The paint was the color of a fresh wound, a red so deep and saturated it seemed to pulse under the overhead lights, even when the car itself was completely, stubbornly dead. But over time, even those visits became too much. By year 3, she had the glass panels cleaned by staff, who were instructed never to speak to her about the car. By year 4, she routed her morning walks to avoid the east wing of the property entirely. By year 5, most of her household staff knew better than to mention the Ferrari in her presence. Not because she had ever exploded at anyone who did, but because of the way her face changed. A subtle flattening. Something going out behind her eyes, the way a lamp dims before it dies completely. The estate sat on 43 acres in the hills above Montecito, California, where the Pacific light came in sideways in the evenings and turned everything gold. It was the kind of property that appeared in architectural magazines with captions like Sanctuary and Legacy. Vanessa had bought it at 31, which was itself a minor media event. Youngest solo female billionaire to purchase in that zip code, headlines read, as if the geography made the achievement more real. She was 30 now when her father died. 30 when the Ferrari died with him, in a manner of speaking. 30 when both the most important things in her life went quiet at the same time. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, had been a mechanic, not a wealthy one, not a famous one. He ran a single-bay garage off Route 9 in a small Central Valley town called Harwick, where the summers were brutal and the population had been declining since 1987. He was the kind of man who knew every customer by name, who kept a coffee maker on a folding table by the door, who wore the same style of gray work shirt every single day of his working life, with his name stitched in red above the left breast pocket. Gerald. He smelled like motor oil and Old Spice, and occasionally, on Friday evenings, like the cheap beer he allowed himself after closing. He had large hands, disproportionately large, Vanessa always thought, like they belonged to a man twice his size. And those hands could diagnose an engine problem the way a doctor reads an X-ray, with a kind of quiet certainty that didn't require performance. He raised Vanessa alone from the time she was 4 years old. Her mother, Claire, had left during a February that Vanessa was too young to fully remember but old enough to have absorbed into her body somewhere below memory. A faint, persistent unease that surfaces in the middle of the night sometimes. A sense of reaching for something that isn't there. Claire had left a note. Gerald had never shown Vanessa the note, but she knew it existed because she found it once, tucked inside a coffee tin on the highest shelf in the garage, when she was 12 and tall enough to finally reach it. She had not read it. She had put it back and never touched it again, and never told her father she'd found it. Some things, she understood even at 12, are better left exactly where they are. Gerald never remarried, never dated seriously, as far as Vanessa knew. He coached her little league team and helped her with geometry homework sitting at the kitchen table under the buzzing fluorescent light, and drove her to Stanford in his old truck with the cracked dashboard when she got in on a full scholarship, and cried, actually cried, openly, with no apology, when he dropped her off. "You're going to do things I can't even imagine," he told her that day. "Dad, stop," she'd said, embarrassed the way teenagers are embarrassed by love. She would spend years regretting that. The way you always regret the moments when love was offered freely, and you flinched from it. He bought the Ferrari the year Vanessa sold her first company. It was not a spontaneous purchase. Gerald had been researching it for months. She found this out later, from his browser history on the old laptop he left behind. Reading forums and auction listings and ownership reviews with the same methodical attention he applied to everything. He had never owned anything expensive in his life. He drove a 2003 Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles on it. He bought his clothes at Sears until Sears stopped existing, and then he bought them at Walmart, and he thought that was fine. But the Ferrari was the 1987 Ferrari Testarossa, Rosso Corsa red, white interior, a car that had appeared in posters on bedroom walls across America during the decade. He came of age, a machine so purely, absurdly beautiful that even people who knew nothing about cars would stop in a parking lot to look at it. He paid $210,000 for it, which, for Gerald Whitmore, was roughly the equivalent of someone else spending their entire life savings on a whim. He called Vanessa the night he bought it, and she could hear in his voice something she had never quite heard before, a boy's giddiness, barely contained, coming through the phone from a 61-year-old man in a gray work shirt. "Nessa," he said, "I did something." "Dad, what did you do?" "I bought a car." Silence. Not a normal car. She had laughed so hard she almost fell out of her chair. He drove it twice, maybe 3 times. He was terrified of it, actually. Terrified of scratching it, of something going wrong, of being the guy who bought a Ferrari and immediately broke it. He kept it in a storage unit initially, which Vanessa found both hilarious and heartbreaking, and she eventually convinced him to let her build him a proper garage to keep it in. So she had a glass-walled structure built on his property, a small parcel of land he owned behind the shop, with climate control and good lighting and a floor epoxy he picked out himself, which was a shade of gray he described as serious. He died 14 months later, massive stroke. He was working in the shop when it happened, which is perhaps the only consolation, that he was doing the thing he loved, surrounded by the smell and the sound of it, when the lights went out. Vanessa flew home on a Tuesday and spent 4 days in Harwick doing things that grief requires, talking to funeral directors, calling people she hadn't spoken to in years, accepting casseroles from neighbors, sitting in her father's house surrounded by his objects, and feeling the absolute foreignness of a world that keeps moving while you are standing completely still. On the last morning, she went into the glass garage. She sat on the floor next to the Ferrari for 2 hours. Then she had it transported to Montecito. The first repair team arrived 6 weeks after the funeral. They came from a specialist outfit in Los Angeles. 4 technicians, all certified, one of them a former Formula One pit crew member who had worked 2 championship seasons in Europe. They brought their own equipment. They were, according to the firm's website, the foremost luxury vehicle restoration specialists on the West Coast. They spent 4 days with the car. The problem was electrical. That much was clear from the beginning. The engine itself was mechanically sound. The cylinders, the pistons, the valve train, all of it in remarkable condition for a car that had been stored properly and rarely driven. But something in the electrical architecture was failing. The engine would not start, would not even crank. Every diagnostic reading came back clean, which was itself the problem. The readings shouldn't be clean, because something was obviously wrong, and the fact that the diagnostics couldn't find it meant the problem was somewhere the standard tools weren't looking. The team left without fixing it. They sent a detailed report. Vanessa read the report and understood approximately 30% of it and paid their invoice and called another firm. Over the next 3 years, she cycled through 12 separate teams. Not all of them were equal. Some were clearly in over their heads and left embarrassed. A few were genuinely talented. One German engineer named Hartmann spent 11 days on the car and came closer than anyone, isolating the fault to a specific subsystem before hitting a wall he couldn't get past. He called Vanessa personally to tell her he was stuck, which she respected. He was the only one who admitted it directly instead of hiding behind technical language. "The car is unusual," Hartmann told her on the phone. His English was precise, slightly formal. The electrical system was modified from factory specifications. Not incorrectly. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. But it creates a diagnostic blind spot. The standard tools see what they expect to see. They miss what has actually changed. "So what do we do?" A long pause. "I don't know," he said. "I'm sorry. I genuinely don't know." She paid him twice his invoice. The Ferrari sat.
Sir.
By year 5, the failed repairs had cost just under $11 million when you added everything together. The specialists, the equipment, the parts that were ordered and installed and then removed, the shipping costs, the hotel bills for technicians, the custom diagnostic tools that 2 different firms had built specifically for this car and which still hadn't solved the problem. $11 million was not a meaningful sum to Vanessa Whitmore in any practical sense. Her net worth, depending on the week and the market, floated somewhere between 4 and 6 billion. She spent more than 11 million on a single bad acquisition in her late 20s and barely felt it. But the money wasn't the point. The money had never been the point. The point was that she was failing at the one thing she had promised herself she would do. She had stood in that glass garage in Harwick on the morning after her father's body was taken away, and she had made a silent, private promise that felt more real and binding than any contract she had ever signed. I will fix this. She had not fixed it. Every failed repair team felt like another installment of the same humiliation. Every phone call with another specialist who had run out of ideas was a small, private defeat. Vanessa Whitmore, who had built a technology company from a dorm room into a $12 billion enterprise, who had been profiled in Forbes and Fast Company and the New York Times Magazine, who had fired and hired and negotiated and outmaneuvered the most aggressive people in the most cutthroat industries, could not fix her father's car. Some mornings, driving back from the garage after another brief, pointless visit, she would be halfway to the main house before she realized her jaw was clenched so tight her molars ached. The 19th team arrived on a Thursday in September. They came with more equipment than anyone before them. 2 large vans, several shipping crates, a portable generator for their diagnostic systems. Their lead engineer was a man named Dr. Philip Court, who had published papers on vintage Italian automotive electrical systems, and who had been, according to a mutual contact who recommended him, the best in the world at this specific thing. Dr. Court was 62, silver-haired, and had the demeanor of a man who was accustomed to being right. He walked around the Ferrari 3 times before touching it, circling it slowly with his hands clasped behind his back, the way a museum curator examines a piece before appraising it. Then he stopped and looked at Vanessa. "I've read all the previous reports," he said. 12 teams, significant documentation. I want to be transparent with you. The previous work narrows what's possible, but it also means any solution we find will be genuinely novel. This will take time." "How much time?" 2 weeks minimum, possibly a month. He stayed for 9 days. On the morning of the 9th day, Vanessa found Dr. Court standing outside the garage. Not inside with the car. Outside, with his hands in his pockets, looking at the glass wall from the outside. His team was packing equipment into the vans. The portable generator was already loaded. "Dr. Court." He turned. Something in his expression, not embarrassment exactly, but close to it. A man who had built a professional identity around being the last resort, confronting the limits of that identity. "Ms. Whitmore." He removed his glasses, polished them with his shirt, put them back on. "I need to tell you that I'm unable to solve this." She had heard this before. It still landed like a fist. "I've identified every component that should theoretically be responsible for this failure," he continued, slipping into the formal register of someone who handles bad news professionally. "None of them are the actual cause. The fault is present somewhere in the integration between systems, a kind of cascading interaction that my instruments can detect the effects of, but not the origin. Without knowing the origin, any repair is essentially guesswork, and guesswork on this system carries the risk of causing additional damage." Vanessa looked past him at the Ferrari through the glass. "I'm sorry," Dr. Court said, and she believed he meant it. "Thank you for your time," she said. Her voice was flat, professional. She had gotten very good at this particular voice. She waited until his van pulled out of the driveway before walking back to the garage. She stood beside the Ferrari for a long time. The afternoon light had shifted, coming through the glass at a low angle, and the red paint caught it in a way that was almost painful to look at. The color too saturated, too alive for something that had been silent for 5 years. Somewhere in the hills behind the estate, a red-tailed hawk was calling. Everything else was quiet. Vanessa pressed the heels of her hands into her eye sockets, breathed through her nose, once, twice. "Okay," she thought. "That's it. That's the last one." She wasn't sure she meant it. She had told herself the same thing after Hartman left, and after the team before Hartman. But this time the thought had a different quality, a kind of exhaustion under it, a bone-deep tiredness that felt less like defeat and more like the body's reasonable response to 5 years of sustained, unrelenting hope. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was Ethan Ryder, one of the estate's maintenance staff, pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. He was heading toward the equipment shed on the far side of the garage, and his route took him past the open garage door, or what had been the open garage door until Dr. Court's team left it open when they loaded out. Ethan noticed her standing there, slowed. I was tall, maybe 6'2", with the kind of build that comes from actual physical work rather than a gym, broad-shouldered but lean, with forearms that showed muscle and fading calluses on his palms. He had dark hair that needed a cut, a few days of stubble, and eyes that were hard to read at distance. He was wearing the estate's maintenance uniform, gray cargo pants, dark green polo, and he had a small stain of something on his left knee that looked like grease. He'd been working on the property for about 8 months. Vanessa knew his name from paperwork and from brief interactions when he'd fixed things around the estate. A plumbing issue in the east wing, some electrical work in the guest cottage. He was quiet, efficient. She had registered him over those 8 months, approximately the way you register furniture. Present, functional, unremarkable. Their eyes met. Ethan looked at Vanessa, then at the Ferrari, then back at Vanessa, with an expression that was difficult to parse. Not pity, not quite, but something adjacent to it. He started to push his cart past the garage. Vanessa, without fully planning to, spoke. "Another team just left," she said. 19 total, 5 years, nobody can fix it. She wasn't sure why she was saying this to a maintenance worker. She hadn't said it out loud to anyone, actually. Not in those specific terms, not with that specific arithmetic. $11 million and 19 teams in 5 years, and nobody could fix it. It sounded absurd, stated plainly. It sounded like the premise of a joke she was the punchline of. Ethan stopped. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the Ferrari through the garage door. "What's the issue?" he asked. Not solicitously, not performing sympathy, just asking. Electrical. Nobody can find where the fault actually is. They can see the effects, but not the source." He looked at the car for another moment. She could see something happening in his face, a subtle shift, like a person hearing a piece of music they recognize but haven't thought about in a long time. "What year is it?" 87, Testarossa. Another silence. Then Vanessa, who had spent 5 years being entirely serious about this car, and had reached a point of such profound extended frustration that something in her had curdled into dark absurdity, said, "Maybe you should fix it." She said it the way you say something when you don't mean it, half joke, maybe a quarter bitterness, the kind of remark that lives in the narrow territory between hopelessness and humor, where people go when they've run out of better options. Ethan looked at her. "I can try," he said. No hesitation, no qualification. No, I'll see what I can do, or I don't know much about old Ferraris, but just a plain calm I can try, delivered in the same tone he might use to say he'd look at the leaky faucet in the east wing. Vanessa stared at him. "Okay," she said, mostly because she had no idea what else to say. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she had agreed because she was tired and the word try was essentially free. It committed him to nothing and cost her nothing, and if he looked at the car for 20 minutes and shrugged, that was 20 minutes and a shrug, and then life continued. But that evening, going through her email on the back terrace, with a glass of Sonoma County Red that she barely tasted, she found herself thinking about the expression on his face when she described the electrical fault. That brief flicker of recognition. The way his eyes had moved to the car like he was recalculating something. She almost called her chief of staff to run a background check. She stopped herself. It was a janitor with a tool cart. There was nothing to background check. She went to bed and slept badly and woke at 5:40 in the morning to the sound of her phone's alarm. When she came down to the kitchen at 6, Maria, who had been running the estate's domestic operations for 9 years and knew everything that happened on the property approximately 4 hours before Vanessa did, said, without looking up from the coffee she was preparing, "Your maintenance man is in the garage. Been there since about 5. Vanessa set her phone down on the marble counter. "Since 5. Sigh. And he brought his daughter, little one, 7, maybe 8. She's sitting in the corner with a backpack doing homework." Maria glanced up. "I took her some fruit and a glass of milk. She said thank you very nicely." Vanessa stood there for a moment. Don't make a big deal of it, she said, and walked toward the garage. She heard it before she saw it. Not the Ferrari. The Ferrari was still silent. What she heard was something smaller, the particular sound of a man working alone, the kind of sounds that don't perform for an audience. The soft clank of a tool being set down carefully. A low murmur. Not words. More like a person thinking out loud in a register below language. She stopped in the doorway. The garage lights were on, all of them, including the secondary work lights that the previous teams had set up, and which no one had bothered to take down. They turned the space into something close to an operating room, white and shadowless and clinical. The Ferrari sat in the center of it, hood up, looking simultaneously vulnerable and impossible, the way old beautiful things look when they're being carefully opened. Ethan was on his back, partially under the car, with a small LED work light clipped to the bumper above him. His feet were visible, work boots, worn, the left one with a fraying lace. His worn toolbox was open on the floor beside him. Not the rolling chest of the professional teams, a battered red metal box, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $40, scuffed along every corner and covered on the inside lid with what appeared to be a collection of old stickers that had been there long enough to fade. In the corner, on a folding chair that Ethan had apparently brought from somewhere, sat a small girl with dark hair in two messy braids, bent over an open workbook. She was wearing a yellow jacket that was too big for her, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and she had a pencil behind one ear and another one in her hand, and she was writing something with the focused intensity of a person who is both working very hard and very accustomed to working in unusual places. Vanessa stood in the doorway long enough to feel like she was intruding. "You don't have to hover," Ethan said from under the car. She felt heat rise to her face. "I wasn't hovering." "The floor tiles creak over there. I heard you stop." She stepped fully into the garage. The girl in the corner looked up, dark eyes, a face with the specific openness of children who haven't yet learned to perform composure for strangers. "Hi," the girl said. "I'm Lily." "I'm Vanessa." "I know, Dad said this is your garage." "It is." "It's really clean," Lily said, in the tone of a child who has considered this and found it notable. "Thank you. Dad's garages are never this clean." A pause. "No offense." From under the car, Ethan made a sound that might have been a stifled laugh. "She's right," he said. Vanessa told herself she would stay 5 minutes. She stayed 2 hours. Part of it was inertia. She had a video call at 9, but nothing until then, and she found herself sitting on a folding chair on the opposite side of the garage from Lily, scrolling through emails she wasn't really reading. Part of it was something harder to name. There was something about the way Ethan worked. She had watched 11 of the 19 previous teams work on this car, at various points. She had formed impressions of all of them. The LA team was fast and slightly performative. They worked like people who wanted to be watched working, with a briskness that communicated competence. Hartman was methodical, almost meditative, which she had appreciated. Dr. Court's team worked with the quiet confidence of people who had solved difficult problems before and expected to again. Ethan worked like none of them. He was slow, unhurried in a way that, in another context, you might read as lazy, except that his attention was absolute. He was not talking to teammates or consulting tablets or pulling up reference material. He was simply looking, listening, running his fingers along wiring beneath panels the way you might read Braille, with a sensitivity that required stillness. At one point, he was flat on his back under the dashboard for nearly 40 minutes without moving. "Are you okay?" Vanessa asked at one point, and immediately regretted the question. "Thinking," Ethan said. "You've been thinking for 40 minutes. It's a complicated thing to think about." She went back to her emails. At 8:45, she stood to leave for her call. Lily had finished her workbook and was now reading a paperback with a dragon on the cover, curled into the folding chair with her feet tucked under her. "I'll have someone bring you breakfast," Vanessa said to the girl. "We already ate," Lily said. "We ate in the truck before." "You ate breakfast in the truck." "Dad makes egg sandwiches on a little camping stove. They're actually really good. He wraps them in foil." Vanessa looked at Ethan, who had emerged from under the dashboard and was sitting back on his heels, examining a bundle of wiring he'd pulled out from somewhere, turning it slowly in the light. "Egg sandwiches," she said. "It's faster than finding parking somewhere," he said, without looking up. "And Lily has a thing about restaurant eggs." "I don't have a thing," Lily said. "I just don't like them." That's a thing. It's a preference. At 7 years old, a preference is a thing. Vanessa stood in the middle of this exchange and had the strange, mild sensation of being slightly outside time, like she'd walked into a scene that had been running without her, and she was trying to find the beat of it. I'll have someone bring coffee at least, she said. That would be great, Ethan said. 2 sugars. She walked to her video call feeling, for reasons she couldn't immediately identify, slightly lighter than she had in a long time. The first day ended without resolution. Ethan stayed until nearly 7 in the evening, at which point Lily had long since exhausted both her workbook and her dragon novel, and was lying on her stomach on the garage floor drawing something on loose paper, the back of her shoes tapping together rhythmically. Come on, bub, Ethan said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. School tomorrow. Did you fix it? Lily asked, rolling over and sitting up. Not yet. How many more days? I don't know yet. That means more days with the camping eggs, she said, but she said it the way children say things they've already accepted, almost cheerfully. Vanessa was walking back from the main house when they came out. She stopped on the path. Same time tomorrow? She asked. She meant it to sound casual. She was not sure it did. Ethan looked at her. If that's all right. Of course. A beat. Did you find anything? I was quiet for a moment. In that particular way she was already starting to recognize. The pause of a person who knows something but is sorting out how to say it accurately. I found something, he said, but I need to confirm it before I tell you because if I'm wrong, I'll sound like an idiot. Vanessa nodded. Fair enough. Lily tugged his sleeve. Dad. All right. He picked her up with one arm, easy, like she weighed nothing, and she looped her arms around his neck and settled against him with the boneless comfort of a child who knows exactly how they fit against their parent. Vanessa watched them walk to his truck, an old Tacoma, somewhere in the vicinity of 200,000 miles, with a crack running across the passenger side of the windshield. Lily was saying something against his neck, and he tilted his head to hear her, and he said something back, and she laughed. The truck pulled out slowly. Vanessa stood on the path for a moment. Then she went inside and ate dinner alone at her kitchen counter, something she had done most evenings for the better part of 4 years. And she tried to remember the last time she had heard someone laugh in this house, and found she couldn't pinpoint it. He came back the next morning at 5. Lily was asleep in the passenger seat, slumped against the window with her dragon novel open in her lap, and Ethan sat in the truck for 20 minutes after he parked before getting out. Vanessa could see this on the security monitor in her home office, not because she was watching, but because she happened to glance at it. He was looking at something on his phone, and then he wasn't looking at anything, just sitting with his head tilted back against the headrest. She thought about that later. The 20 minutes of sitting. He took his toolbox from the truck bed and went into the garage without turning on all the lights. Just the work light clipped to the bumper, and his headlamp, and the early gray pre-dawn light coming through the glass walls. He looked, from where Vanessa watched briefly from the kitchen window, like someone praying. She was not in the garage when it happened. She was in her office on a call with her CFO about Q3 projections when the sound came through the walls and through the glass and across 43 acres of California property and into her chest like something physical. The Ferrari's engine turned over once, twice, and then roared. There was no other word for it. It wasn't a start. It wasn't a turnover. It was a full-throated, absolute, chest-vibrating roar that lasted 3 seconds before Ethan presumably backed off the throttle. And in those 3 seconds, Vanessa Whitmore, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, who had testified before a Senate subcommittee and held her composure through 2 hours of hostile questioning, who had buried her father without falling apart in public because she knew he would have found it embarrassing, started crying, just like that. Sitting in her office chair with the phone to her ear, her CFO mid-sentence about year-over-year comparisons, tears running down her face without warning or permission. I have to call you back, she said, and hung up before he could respond. She ran to the garage. Not walked. Ran, the flat sprint of someone moving towards something they don't fully trust to still be there by the time they arrive. Her shoes were wrong for it, and she didn't care. She took the path from the main house to the east wing at full speed and came through the garage door slightly out of breath and stopped. The Ferrari's engine was idling, running, alive. The sound it made at idle was lower than she'd expected, a deep, rolling purr that she felt more than heard, a vibration that came up through the floor and into the soles of her feet. The garage smelled different now, oil and exhaust and something older underneath, something that reached back through the years to a small shop off Route 9, where a man in a gray work shirt knew every customer by name. Ethan was standing to the left of the car, arms crossed, watching the engine run with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Something in it was satisfied, but not triumphant. Not the way a performer looks when the applause starts. More the way a person looks when something that was broken and important is no longer broken. Relief, primarily. And underneath the relief, something more complicated. Lily had woken up. She was standing in the garage doorway behind Vanessa in her socks, hair still compressed from sleeping against the car window, holding her dragon novel. She looked at the running Ferrari and then at her father. "You did it," she said. "It ran," Ethan said, like he was being careful about the distinction. By the time the two estate gardeners who worked the morning shift had drifted over from the south grounds to see what the sound was, and Maria had come out of the main house wiping her hands on a dish towel and stopped dead in the pathway. With her mouth open, Vanessa had not moved from where she'd stopped when she came through the door. She was still crying, not the polished, controlled grief she allowed herself sometimes in private. The other kind, messy and unplanned, the kind that doesn't care that people are watching. Ethan looked at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't tell her it was okay, or ask if she was all right, or perform the particular discomfort most people perform when they witness someone else's raw emotion unexpectedly. He just let her have it. Stood there quietly while the Ferrari ran and Lily watched and Maria covered her mouth, and the morning light came through the glass and turned everything briefly, improbably gold. Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands and breathed, and the Ferrari breathed with her. The crying stopped eventually, the way crying always does. Not cleanly, not with resolution, but with the gradual exhaustion of something that had been held too long. Vanessa sat on the garage floor with her back against the workbench and her knees pulled up, and she let the Ferrari's idle wash over her like sound from a different decade. Maria had quietly ushered the gardeners away. Lily had disappeared to her folding chair in the corner with the tactful instinct of a child raised in close quarters with adult grief. The kind of child who has learned that sometimes you give people space, not because you're told to, but because you understand, somewhere below the level of words, that it's necessary. Ethan sat on an overturned bucket a few feet away, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to signal indifference. He had found a middling distance that managed to be both respectful and present, and he sat with his forearms on his knees and his eyes on the running engine, and he didn't try to fill the silence with anything. Eventually Vanessa said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "That was—" She gestured vaguely at her own face, the evidence of what had just happened. "That wasn't very professional." Ethan looked at her sideways. "You're in your own garage." Still nothing. He picked up a shop rag from the floor beside him and turned it over in his hands. "My wife died when Lily was born. In the hospital parking garage, when I was driving back to grab some things she'd asked for. Her phone charger, her good pillow from home. I pulled into a parking space and I sat there and I cried for probably 20 minutes. There were people walking past. I didn't care." A beat. "Sometimes things make you cry." "That's what they do." Vanessa looked at him. I was still looking at the engine when he said it. The same quiet, matter-of-fact delivery he seemed to apply to everything, and there was something about the plainness of it that made it hit harder than a longer speech would have. No wind-up. No performance of grief. Just a man mentioning a true thing the way you mention the weather. "I didn't know that," Vanessa said. "About your wife. Nobody here does." He shrugged, but not dismissively. A shrug that meant it isn't the first thing I lead with. "It was 7 years ago. It's not... it doesn't feel like 7 years ago exactly. But it is." The Ferrari idled between them. "What was her name?" Vanessa asked. Something shifted in his face. People don't always ask that. She'd noticed it herself after her father died. The way people stepped carefully around the dead person, referencing the loss without touching the person directly, as if the name itself was dangerous. "Sophie," he said. "Her name was Sophie." "That's a good name." "Yeah." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. She would have absolutely hated Lily's hair this morning. She had very strong feelings about braids. From the corner, Lily's voice came without her looking up from her novel. "My braids are fine." "Your braids look like they lost a fight," Ethan said. "They have character." "That's one word for it." Vanessa laughed, short and involuntary, surprised out of her. It felt strange in her chest, the way laughing does when you've been crying recently, like two different instruments playing in the same small room. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, which accomplished almost nothing in terms of presentation. Okay, she said, tell me what you found. Ethan set down the shop rag. He stood, stretching his back with a grimace that he didn't bother to hide, and walked to the Ferrari's open hood. He leaned over it, pointing to a section of wiring harness near the right side of the engine bay. A dense bundle of cables routed along a custom bracket that hadn't come with the original factory configuration. Whoever owned this car before your father modified the electrical system, he said. Not badly. The work was actually pretty sophisticated. They integrated an aftermarket security and monitoring system into the factory wiring, which was common in the late 80s and 90s on cars like this. The problem is the integration point. He traced his finger along the harness without touching it. Right here. There's a ground path that was rerouted as part of the modification. Over 30-something years, the insulation on the modified section degraded in a very specific way, not uniformly, not enough to show as a clear short or a clean break, just enough to create an intermittent resistance change under certain conditions. What conditions? Temperature. When the engine bay reaches a certain temperature during warm-up, the resistance spikes just enough to confuse the ignition management system. The system sees the reading as a sensor error and shuts the ignition cycle down before the engine can complete its start sequence. It's looking at the wrong thing. He straightened up. Every diagnostic tool those other teams used was looking for a clean fault, a break, a short, a failed component. There wasn't one. There was just a degraded section of a modified ground path that nobody knew was modified because the modification was hidden under the factory harness sleeve. Vanessa stared at him. How did you find it? I wasn't looking for a fault. He leaned against the side of the car, arms crossed. I was looking at the whole system, the way everything connected. When you look at the whole system instead of running individual tests, the pattern shows up. It's subtle, but it's there. The behavior wasn't random, it was consistent. The car always failed in the same way. That means the cause was in a fixed location doing a fixed thing. Once I understood what the behavior meant, finding the location was just time. $11 million, Vanessa said slowly. 19 engineers. And you found it by looking at the whole system. The other teams were working from the previous team's reports, he said. By the time the fourth or fifth team came through, everybody was looking in the places the previous teams had already looked, trying to find something they'd missed. Nobody started fresh. He paused. Also, I knew this type of modification. I'd seen it before. There was something in that last sentence, a small weight behind it, the tip of something larger underneath. Vanessa filed it away. What did the repair actually take? She asked. About 40 minutes once I found it. I rerouted the ground path, replaced the degraded section with period-correct wiring, and removed the redundant components from the aftermarket security system that weren't serving any function anymore. He looked at the running engine. The car's clean now. Everything it has is what it's supposed to have. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. The Ferrari was still idling, patient and steady, like something that had been waiting a long time to demonstrate it was fine. Ethan, she said carefully, how do you know about period-correct wiring for a 1987 Ferrari Testarossa? He looked at her. It was the first time she'd seen him look even slightly caught off guard, and it passed quickly. A brief recalibration, the expression of a person deciding in real time how much to say. I used to work in automotive engineering, he said. Used to. She waited. He looked at the engine for a long moment, and she had the sense that he was weighing something. Not whether to be honest, but how much honesty to offer. There is a particular kind of restraint in people who have been reduced by life from one version of themselves to a lesser regarded one, a practiced economy around their own history, as if spending it carelessly might somehow deplete it. That's a longer conversation, he said. I have time. He looked at her, then at Lily, who was demonstrably not paying attention to them, her nose thoroughly inside her novel. Not in front of her, he said quietly. Vanessa nodded. Fair enough. She stood up from the floor, brushing dust from the back of her slacks with both hands, and walked to the driver's side of the Ferrari. The door opened with the specific mechanical click of a well-engineered machine, solid and deliberate, and she lowered herself into the driver's seat. The smell hit her first. Leather and aged rubber, and something underneath those things. something she couldn't name precisely, only locate. It lived in the part of her memory that doesn't use language, the part that stores sensory experience without translation. She had been in this car exactly twice before, both times as a teenager sitting in the passenger seat while her father drove a slow, cautious loop around a nearly empty parking lot, gripping the wheel with both hands and beaming like a man who could not believe his own life. She put both hands on the steering wheel. Ethan stood at the driver's door watching her without speaking. He was scared of it, she said. He had the most beautiful car in the county, and he was scared to drive it. Sounds like he respected it. He was afraid of breaking something he loved. She looked at her hands on the wheel. That was a pattern with him. She didn't say anything else, and neither did he. And after a moment she got out of the car, and they stood side by side looking at it running, the sound filling the garage steadily, and it felt like something that had been broken in the air was slowly being mended, molecule by molecule, without fanfare. "Thank you," she said. Simple. She had given elaborate, formal thank yous to 12 different specialists over 5 years. This one felt different, smaller and truer. "You're welcome," Ethan said. Same quality, no deflection. From the corner, Lily's voice. "Can we get a breakfast now? Real breakfast, not truck breakfast." "We're guests," Ethan said. She said she'd have someone bring coffee. Coffee is breakfast adjacent. "It is not." "I'll have Maria make eggs," Vanessa said. "Real eggs. Not truck eggs." A pause. "Okay, I walked into that," Ethan said. And for the second time that morning, Vanessa laughed without meaning to. The Ferrari kept running. Outside, the California morning was doing its reliable, indifferent thing, turning the light gold, warming the air, carrying the smell of the eucalyptus on the hillside down across the estate. The hawk was calling again somewhere in the distance. Things were, against all reasonable expectation, okay. For now, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was more than Vanessa had felt in a long time. The full story broke the following morning, though broke is perhaps too controlled a word for what it did. It detonated would be closer, by 9 a.m. On Thursday, 3 separate tech and business news outlets had run items under variations of the same headline. Whitmore Estate, maintenance worker, fixes Ferrari. That stumped world's top engineers. And the story was moving fast through the particular social media ecosystem that caters to the combination of wealth, mystery, and the satisfying structural beat of the underdog narrative. By noon, it was on the homepage of 2 national papers. By 3 in the afternoon, a Los Angeles television station had a camera crew parked outside the estate's main gate. Vanessa found out about the camera crew from Marcus, her head of security, who appeared in her office doorway with the expression of a man delivering bad news he knows is worse than it looks. "How did it get out?" she asked. "One of the gardeners," Marcus said. He had the decency to look apologetic. "You took a video this morning. The Ferrari running. Your reaction." Vanessa went still. "My reaction. It didn't show your face clearly," he says. "He's very sorry." Marcus paused. "He has posted it to 3 platforms." She looked at her desk for a moment. Then she said, "Where's Ethan?" "Still on property. He was doing the routine maintenance on the guest cottage when I checked 20 minutes ago. Tell him to come see me. Not through the front gate area, through the east path." Marcus nodded and withdrew. Vanessa turned her chair to face the window. She could see the tree line on the east perimeter from here, and beyond it, at the property boundary, a thin strip of the access road where she knew the camera crew was sitting. She pressed 2 fingers between her eyebrows and thought about what the story looked like from the outside. Because she was good at this, at reading narratives, at understanding the shape a thing takes when it becomes public property. It looked like a fairy tale. Rich woman, dead Ferrari, failed experts, mystery janitor. That was the shape of it. Clean, almost aggressively clean, in the way that real stories almost never are. The internet was going to eat it. She thought about Ethan's face when she'd asked how he knew about period-correct wiring, the brief recalibration, the slight weight behind "I used to work in automotive engineering." He had not told her the longer story yet. They'd been interrupted by Lily's breakfast demands, and then Maria had made a full spread. Scrambled eggs, toast, cut fruit, which Lily had eaten with the focused satisfaction of a person who has been surviving on foil-wrapped truck sandwiches and found unexpected civilization. And then Vanessa had been pulled into back-to-back calls for the rest of the morning. She didn't know the longer story yet, but whoever was writing the headlines right now was going to dig until they found it. That was the other thing she understood about narratives. Once they started moving, they consumed everything attached to them. She needed to talk to him before the story did. Ethan appeared in her office doorway 7 minutes later, still in his work uniform, with a smudge of something along his forearm. He took in the room, the large desk, the monitors with news sites open, the general atmosphere of someone in the middle of managing a situation, and said, "I saw a news van at the gate." "Come in," Vanessa said. "Close the door." He came in. He didn't sit, stood with his hands in his pockets, taking in the monitors without much visible reaction. "It's moving fast," she said. "The story. I need to understand what they're going to find when they start looking into your background, because they will start looking, and I'd rather hear it from you first." Something moved across his face. Not defensiveness, something older than that. The expression of a person who has spent years being invisible and is now watching that invisibility dissolve. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "My name is Ethan Ryder," he said. "Until 8 years ago, I worked for a company called Meridian Automotive Systems. They're a design and engineering firm. They partner with luxury and performance brands to develop advanced systems, mostly electrical, some drivetrain." He looked at his hands. "I was their lead integration engineer on 3 development projects. One of them was a partnership with a major Italian manufacturer." Vanessa was very still. "Ferrari," she said. "Not directly. Meridian did contract work for a subsidiary that supplied components and integration systems to Ferrari and a few other manufacturers during the late 80s and 90s. The Testarossa was one of the platforms I worked on as a junior engineer, early in my career. The aftermarket modification on your father's car, the security system integration, that was a common third-party add-on during that era. I'd seen the integration points fail before, years earlier, on another car from that period. Different symptom, same underlying mechanism." He paused. "That's why I recognized the pattern. Why didn't you—" Vanessa stopped, reformulated. "When you were working here all this time, why didn't you say anything, apply for something at your level?" He looked up at her. The question seemed to land somewhere real. "Because I left this industry," he said. "Completely. After Sophie died, I just left. I walked away from my position, turned down 2 contract offers, went dark on every professional contact I had. I needed to be present for Lily, and I couldn't do that and be what that work required you to be. The hours, the travel, the way that world consumes you." He shook his head. "I didn't have anything left over. But maintenance work let me control my schedule. I could take Lily to school. I could be home by a certain time. I could take a Tuesday afternoon off when she was sick without anyone losing $1 million timeline." He said it without apology, without the particular self-consciousness people have when they know their choices look like underachievement from the outside. Grief does something to your ambitions. It reorganizes what feels important. The things I used to care about, the career, the title, being the youngest person to do whatever. It stopped feeling like anything. Lily felt like something. Everything else was just filling time around her. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. She had run performance reviews on dozens of executives. She had sat across from brilliant, qualified people and evaluated them with a precision that was, she knew, partially cold. She was good at reading people, reading what they wanted, what they were concealing, what narrative they were constructing about themselves. She did not think Ethan Ryder was constructing a narrative. I was telling her the thing, simply and with no interest in how it made him look. "The last team I brought in," she said, "Dr. Court, he published papers on Italian vintage electrical systems. He has the professional reputation, the credentials, the—" She stopped. "He spent 9 days and couldn't find it. You spent a day and a half." "He was also working from 12 previous teams' documentation," Ethan said. "I told you. I know what you told me, but that's not all of it." She leaned back. "You knew something they didn't know. You had specific knowledge that wasn't in any academic paper or diagnostic protocol because you helped develop the systems being diagnosed." He didn't argue with this. "Which means," she said carefully, "that you've been pushing a mop down my hallways for 8 months, when you are, if we're being exact about it, One of the most qualified people to have ever walked onto this property. Ethan's expression shifted, not embarrassed, not defensive, but something close to tired. The tiredness of a person who has had some version of this conversation before, internally, in the privacy of their own head, at 2 in the morning when Lily is asleep and the apartment is quiet and the world feels very large. I'm qualified on paper, he said. Practically speaking, I've been out of the industry for 8 years. The technology has moved. My contacts are gone or moved on. My certifications lapsed a long time ago. All of those things are fixable. Maybe. He looked at the window. But they weren't my priority. Lily. Lily. The name settled in the room with a weight proportional to everything it carried. The dead wife, the abandoned career, the lunch boxes and school pickups, and early mornings in a cold parking lot eating egg sandwiches out of foil. 8 years distilled into a 7-year-old with messy braids who had strong opinions about restaurant eggs, and a father who knew how to sit with someone's grief without trying to fix it. Vanessa turned back to her monitors. The news was still moving. She could see the headline count in the corner of her screen, a number that had increased by 11 in the last 15 minutes. The press is going to find your employment history, she said. Meridian, the Ferrari contracts, all of it. It'll take them maybe a day. When they do, this story gets significantly bigger. I know. Are you going to talk to them? No. Even when they show up at wherever you're living, something crossed his face. A flash of something protective and quick, the instinct of a person whose first thought is always about the child. They better not, he said quietly, and the quietness of it was more emphatic than if he'd raised his voice. I can help with that, Vanessa said. If you want, we can manage the press contact, limit access, put out a statement on your behalf, or not put out a statement, whatever you prefer. He looked at her. Why? Because you fixed my car, she said. And because, she paused, finding the honest version of the thing rather than the easy version. Because you spent 8 months on this property, and I never once asked about you, where you came from, what you'd done, what you were. She set her pen down on the desk. That's on me. The least I can do is make sure you have some control over how your story comes out. He was quiet for a long moment. The statement, he said finally. If it keeps the cameras away from Lily's school, yeah, that would help. She nodded. Done. A pause. Also, he said, and she thought she detected the faintest, most reluctant trace of something that might, in better lighting, be called humor, I should probably know. Am I still employed here? Vanessa looked at him. That's a conversation we're going to have, she said, as soon as I figure out what I actually want to offer you, because it's not going to be maintenance work. I told you, my certifications are Ethan. She said it firmly but without heat. I run a $12 billion technology company. I have the resources to fund the fastest professional reinstatement in the history of the automotive engineering field if I want to. Whether you want that is a separate question, but don't tell me what's possible. That's my job. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, You're kind of intense. I've been told. Is it always like this? It gets worse when I'm interested in something. He seemed to consider this. Then he stood, the way he did everything, without unnecessary ceremony, functional, no performance. I should get back to the cottage maintenance. You've probably got about 30 things to deal with now. 40, she said. Right. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. The car, he said. You should drive it. Not in the parking lot. Actually, drive it. He didn't turn around when he said this. He would have wanted that. She didn't answer immediately because the sentence hit her somewhere she hadn't expected to be hit, and she needed a second. I know, she said. He left. She turned back to the monitors where the headlines kept accumulating at the speed that news moves now, which is the speed of wildfire, the speed of things that can't be controlled once they've caught. And she thought about the shape of the story that was forming out there, the fairy tale shape of it, the clean, satisfying arc. What the story couldn't see from the outside was the actual texture of it. The egg sandwiches in foil, the 40 minutes of lying under a dashboard thinking, the name Sophie said plainly, without warning or protective wrapper, by a man who had learned to carry grief without hiding it. The headlines would write about the Ferrari. They would write about the janitor who turned out to be an engineer. They would write about $11 million and 19 failed teams and one quiet man with a worn toolbox. They would not write about the 20 minutes Ethan sat in his truck in the dark before coming in. They would not write about the way he didn't flinch from her crying. They would not write about any of the things that mattered most, because those things don't compress into headlines. Vanessa understood this. She was, among other things, a person who had spent years inside the machinery of public narrative, who knew the difference between the story that gets told and the thing that actually happened. She saved a draft of the press statement. She texted Marcus to keep the camera crew off the property. She poured herself a second coffee and let it go cold while she worked through the calls that needed to be made, the decisions that needed to be made, the usual machinery of a day that had been hijacked by something unexpected. And somewhere in the background of all of it, like a steady note held beneath the noise, she could still hear the Ferrari running. Lily lost her left shoe somewhere between the garage and the main house at approximately 11:30 in the morning, which became apparent when she appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding only one sneaker and looking at Maria with the expression of a child who is slightly embarrassed, but mostly philosophically unbothered. "I need help finding my shoe," she announced. Maria, who had been making lunch and was already, Vanessa suspected, half in love with this child, said, "Where did you last have it?" "On my foot," Lily said. "Before that, also on my foot." Maria made a sound that was not quite a laugh and led Lily back out toward the garage. Vanessa, passing through the kitchen to refill her coffee, paused at the window and watched them. The small woman with gray-streaked hair and the small girl in the yellow jacket, one shoe on, picking their way across the stone path, while Lily explained in considerable detail her theory about why left shoes are always the ones that go missing. It was a good theory, as it turned out. Something about the way people favor their right side when they step in or out of things, she said, which made the left foot more likely to snag on things, or have its shoe knocked loose. "That's very interesting," Maria said. "I read it somewhere," Lily said. "Or maybe I made it up. I can't always tell the difference." Vanessa stood at the window with her coffee and watched them until they disappeared around the corner of the garage, and she felt again that particular quality of lightness. She'd noticed that morning after Lily said, "I'm Lily, and it's really clean in here," a lightness that had nothing to do with any of the things she normally associated with feeling good. Not the satisfaction of a deal closed or a quarter's numbers, not the specific pleasure of having navigated something difficult, but something quieter and less directional. The shoe was found under the Ferrari, which Lily said made complete sense, and Ethan said he had no explanation for. It had been that kind of morning. Wow. The press statement went out at 4 in the afternoon. Vanessa's communications director, a carefully composed woman named Andrea, who had managed media crises involving federal investigations and never lost her footing, reviewed it twice and said it was unusually direct in a tone that was not entirely complimentary. "Is there a problem with direct?" Vanessa asked. "In my experience, direct tends to invite follow-up questions." "Let them ask follow-up questions. I'll answer them." Andrea's composure flickered just slightly. "You want to do press?" "I want one brief statement, in person, at the gate, 20 minutes, no property access. On the Ferrari story. On the Ferrari story. And on the broader subject of talent that gets overlooked because of job title." Vanessa looked at her. "I have thoughts on that subject." "I don't doubt it," Andrea said, in a tone that had given up on convincing her of anything. Ethan, when told about the press statement and the brief appearance, said, "I don't want to be there for it." "You don't have to be." "I don't want my name in the statement." "The news already has your name." "That doesn't mean you have to amplify it." Vanessa considered him. He was standing in the doorway of the estate kitchen at this point, having come in after finishing the guest cottage work, and Lily was at the kitchen table eating the remains of the lunch Maria had made, working her way through a bowl of cut melon with the slow enjoyment of someone who has nowhere to be. "I can use your first name only," Vanessa said, "and reference your professional background without naming the company." He thought about it. "Yeah, okay. Does Lily's school know who you are?" She asked it carefully. "I mean, do people there know your professional background?" "No." He said it flatly, not with shame or regret. "She goes to Franklin Elementary. It's a good school. Her teacher's name is Mrs. Delgado, and she's known for being strict about math homework. Nobody there knows anything about automotive engineering, and that's the way I like it." "I'll make sure the statement doesn't touch the school." He nodded once. "Thank you." From the table, Lily said, without looking up from her melon. "Is our address going to be on TV?" Both adults looked at her.
No, Ethan said. Absolutely not. Good. Because Madison at school already thinks we live somewhere fancy because I mentioned the garage and the camping stove in the same week and she couldn't make sense of it. That's a reasonable confusion, Ethan said. I told her we're complicated, Lily said. She said that's a grown-up word. I said some kids are complicated too. She looked up. Are we going to stay here more days or are we going home tonight? Ethan looked at Vanessa briefly. A quick, almost unconscious check, the kind you do without meaning to when the question isn't entirely yours to answer. We'll go home tonight, he said. Okay. Lily returns to her melon. Can I take some of this melon? It's really good. Our melon at home is always kind of sad. Take as much as you want, Vanessa said. Thanks. A beat. Your house is really nice, but it's also kind of quiet. Lily, Ethan said. I'm not being rude, I'm observing, Lily said, with the precise dignity of a 7-year-old who has clearly deployed this distinction before. She's right, Vanessa said, surprising herself. It is quiet. Lily looked at her with those direct, dark eyes, and Vanessa had the particular, slightly unsettling experience of being assessed very accurately by someone who had not yet learned to be tactful about what she was seeing. That seems lonely, Lily said. Lily, Ethan started. It's okay, Vanessa said quietly. She's not wrong. The kitchen held that for a moment. The afternoon light had shifted, coming through the window at a lower angle now, turning the countertops warm. And outside somewhere on the hillside, the eucalyptus was moving in a light wind, and the whole thing had the quality of a moment that doesn't know it's being remembered, the kind that surfaces years later without warning. Lily ate her melon. Ethan looked at his hands. Vanessa looked at the window. The Ferrari sat in its garage. Engine now cool, patient, and present. The press statement ran at 4:15, and by 8 that evening, the story had been picked up by 47 outlets across 11 countries. Vanessa had stood at the estate gate for exactly 22 minutes. She answered 8 questions. She said what she meant to say, which was that a man of significant professional talent had fixed a problem that no one else could fix, and that the story raised questions she intended to sit with about how she and her company evaluated people. She said it without the performed humility that press moments usually required. Not I learned such a valuable lesson, but something closer to I missed something I shouldn't have missed, and I'm thinking about what that means. Andrea had watched from 6 feet back with the expression of a woman who had stopped trying to predict what her employer was going to do and was managing it in real time. When one reporter, young, with the particular tenacity of someone who had recently discovered that persistence works, asked directly whether Vanessa planned to offer Ethan a position at her company, she said, "That conversation is between him and me. It's not for the gate." The reporter followed up. "Does he know what you're considering?" "He knows I'm thinking about it," she said. "That's all I'll say." She walked back through the gate. Marcus closed it behind her. The clip of that exchange, "That conversation is between him and me," was the one that ran on repeat for the next 18 hours. It was the phrasing, people decided. The specific word him, delivered without title or qualifier, carrying something in it that was either professional respect or something more personal or both, and the ambiguity was catnip for the internet, which had been waiting all day for a thread to pull. By the time Vanessa woke up the next morning, the comment section on every piece about the Ferrari story had become a spirited, earnest, largely uninformed debate about whether something romantic was happening, whether it should be, what it said about class dynamics, and whether the Ferrari itself was a metaphor for something, a question that Vanessa found both irritating and, if she was honest with herself in the dark quiet of her bathroom at 6:15 in the morning, not entirely uninteresting. She was not interested in Ethan Ryder in the way the internet wanted her to be interested in him. That was what she told herself, washing her face, not looking too long at her own reflection. She was interested in him the way you're interested in a person who surprises you, who turns out to be more complicated than the category you'd placed them in, and whose complication makes you aware that you'd placed them in a category at all. That was a different thing. She was reasonably sure it was a different thing. She went downstairs and drank her coffee and read the news, and called her CFO back about the Q3 projections she'd abandoned mid-sentence the day before. And she ran her day the way she ran every day, with the focused forward momentum that had always been both her greatest professional asset and the thing that occasionally made her feel, at the end of a particular kind of evening, like she'd been moving so fast she'd passed herself somewhere back on the road. Ethan called at 10 in the morning. She didn't have his number saved. They'd only spoken in person until now, or through Marcus as intermediary.
But Andrea had exchanged contacts with him for press coordination purposes, and so his name appeared on her screen with the note underneath in the contact, Ryder E. Ferrari, maintenance. She looked at that note for a second before answering. I got an email this morning, he said, without preamble. From Meridian. Your old company. My old company. A pause. It was from the VP of Engineering Development, a man named Baxter. He wasn't there when I was. He came in a few years after I left. He wants to discuss a consulting engagement. How did he phrase it? We would love to explore a mutually beneficial arrangement given your recently highlighted expertise. Ethan said it in a tone that managed to convey exactly what he thought of that phrasing without raising his voice at all. He used the words recently highlighted like I just developed the expertise, like it appeared overnight. It's a standard corporate opening. It's a corporate opening that treats 8 years of my life as a gap in a resume that needs to be contextually smoothed over. He paused again. I also got 4 other emails. 2 from automotive firms I've never heard of, 1 from a PR company who wants to represent me for speaking engagements, and 1 from a journalist who found my address somehow. Vanessa set down her coffee. The journalist. What did they want? The full story, the personal story. Sophie, Lily, the whole... He stopped. They called it a human interest piece. They said it would be a chance to control my narrative. What did you say? I didn't say anything. I deleted the email. Good. Is it? Because apparently I have a narrative now, whether I want one or not. She didn't answer immediately because he was right and she knew it. And she had some responsibility for the speed at which this had moved. The press appearance at the gate had been her decision. He had agreed to the statement, and the statement had used his first name only, but the statement had also confirmed his professional background, and the professional background was the thread the story needed. I'm sorry, she said. I should have been more careful about what the statement confirmed. You warned me it was going to move fast. I did, and it still moved faster than I handled it. A beat. This was not, she sensed, a conversation where he was looking for an apology. He wasn't calling to assign blame. He was calling because something was happening that was outside his experience, and she was the person he knew who had operated inside public narratives before. What do I do with the Meridian email? He asked. Ignore it for now, or have someone you trust respond that you're considering your options and will be in touch. Don't close the door. Don't open it. Give yourself time to think. I've been thinking. About Meridian? About your conversation, the one you said we'd have about what you were considering offering me. He said this carefully, the way he said most things, not guarded exactly, but precise, aware of what words committed him to. I've been thinking about that. Do you want to have it now? Not on the phone, he said, and not without knowing what you actually think is possible. I'm not coming in to negotiate without knowing the shape of the offer. This was, Vanessa thought, genuinely intelligent negotiating. Most people came to the table without this. They let the other side frame everything. Ethan was telling her plainly that he wasn't going to perform gratitude or desperation. He wanted information first. Come in on Monday, she said. Bring Lily if you need to. I'll have Maria make actual breakfast, not the adjacent kind. She heard something shift in his voice, not the ghost of a smile this time, the actual one, quiet and brief, and aimed away from the phone probably, the kind people make when they're caught off guard by something small that's funny. Yeah, all right, he said. Monday. And Ethan, don't answer the other emails, not yet. Wasn't planning to. The speaking engagement one especially. Those companies will turn your story into a product before you've even figured out what your story is. A short silence. Is that what you did? When you first became... He searched for the word. When you first became this. Yes, she said simply, and I regret parts of it. Let other people write the version of me that was easiest to sell, before I understood that I could write my own version instead. She picked up her coffee again. You have more time than they want you to think you have. Don't let the urgency be theirs. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Monday. He hung up. Vanessa held the phone for a second, looking at the contact note again. Ryder E. Ferrari maintenance. She picked up the phone, edited the note, and changed it to just Ethan. She put the phone face down and went back to her emails. Outside, the California morning continued its reliable business. The hawk was somewhere in the thermals above the hillside. The eucalyptus moved. The Ferrari sat in its glass garage with its new ground path and its period-correct wiring, breathing steadily in the dark. It took the media approximately 31 hours from the initial story to find Ethan's full professional history at Meridian Automotive Systems. The person who found it first was not, as Vanessa had expected, one of the major outlets. It was a car blog, a well-read, technically knowledgeable site called Torque and Tonnage that had a devoted following among serious automotive enthusiasts, run by a former racing journalist named Paul Whitfield, who had been in the industry long enough to have his own contacts at Meridian. Paul made one phone call to an old source on Friday afternoon, and by Friday evening had posted a piece that was so detailed and accurate about Ethan's specific contributions to the Testarossa-era systems that Vanessa's communications director called her at 9 p.m. to say, "It's out, and it's thorough." Vanessa read it at her kitchen counter with a glass of wine she forgot to drink. Paul Whitfield wrote well, which made it worse. Not worse in the sense of inaccurate. The piece was carefully sourced and scrupulously fair. Worse in the sense that it was good enough to be believed completely, and what it said was this: that Ethan Ryder had been, in his mid-20s, a genuinely rare engineering talent, that his work on electrical integration systems had been cited in 2 internal Meridian development reports as foundational, that his departure from the industry after his wife's death had been noted, internally, as a significant loss, that one former colleague, speaking anonymously, described him as the person who understood how these systems actually breathed, not just how they were supposed to work on paper. Paul had also found Lily. Not by name, he had the decency or the legal caution not to name the child. But the piece mentioned that Ethan had raised a daughter alone while working maintenance jobs across the Montecito area for the past several years, and it quoted a neighbor of Ethan's who had not been asked by anyone not to talk, and who had, with genuine warmth and without any apparent understanding of what they were setting in motion, described Ethan as just the most dedicated father you've ever seen. That little girl is his whole world. The internet received this information with the force of a crowd that has been waiting for the emotional crescendo and has finally arrived at it. By midnight, it was trending. By Saturday morning, 3 separate fundraising campaigns had been started in Ethan's name without his knowledge or consent. By Saturday afternoon, one of the automotive firms that had emailed him had offered, publicly on their social media channels, a position worth an amount of money that Vanessa knew, having spent time in that industry, was inflated by approximately 40% for the press optics. She called Andrea at 7 Saturday morning and said, "We need to move faster on our side." "I've been awake since 5, Andrea said. "The fundraising campaigns are the immediate problem. He hasn't authorized them, and they're collecting real money. Can we get them taken down?" "Working on it. But every time we get one removed, 2 more appear. The sentiment is, it's not malicious, the people doing it genuinely want to help. That makes it harder to fight." "What about the job offer from," Vanessa named the automotive firm. "That one's straight recruitment theater," Andrea said. "They're not planning to actually make that hire, they're doing it for the visibility. If he accepts, great. If he doesn't, they've demonstrated publicly that they recognize talent. It costs them nothing either way." Vanessa stood at her kitchen window with her phone and her cold coffee and thought about Ethan at his apartment, wherever that was, because she realized she didn't actually know his address, which was a strange thing to realize about a person who had been on her property for 8 months, reading these stories about himself, about Sophie, about his daughter described by a neighbor as his whole world, reading these true things turned into product, into content, into a scroll item, people liked and shared and moved on from in the time it takes to eat breakfast. She texted him. It was a short text. She kept it short on purpose. "I've seen the Torque and Tonnage piece. I'm sorry. We're working on the fundraising campaigns. You don't have to respond to anything today or this weekend. That's my strong recommendation. Call me if you need to." 3 minutes later, his response. "Lily found one of the fundraisers this morning. She thought it was funny that people wanted to give us money." She stared at that for a moment. Then she typed, "What did you tell her?" "That people were being kind, but we didn't need it and the money would go somewhere better. That was the right call." "Yeah." She asked if we were famous now. I said no. She said the neighbor guy who talked to the reporter owes her a bag of chips because she watered his plants twice last summer. Vanessa sat down at the kitchen table. For the second time in 3 days, she laughed in a way that was entirely involuntary and arrived from somewhere she hadn't expected. She put the phone down, picked it up again. She's not wrong about the chips. His response took a minute. Don't tell her that. I'll never hear the end of it. She put the phone down and sat with her coffee for a while in the early morning quiet, and she thought about the particular texture of this, the strange, ungainly, slightly absurd situation of a story about her property and her father's car generating a news cycle that was now running completely beyond anyone's ability to control it. She thought about what she'd said to Ethan on the phone. Don't let the urgency be theirs. She was not entirely following her own advice. She could feel the pull of the momentum, the instinct to respond faster, to get ahead of it, to manage the narrative before the narrative managed her. It was a reflex she'd developed over 12 years of running a public company, and it wasn't always wrong. But it was sometimes wrong, and this felt like one of those times. She needed to let it breathe for a day. She spent Saturday dealing with the immediate problems. The fundraisers, 2 of which were successfully removed by Saturday afternoon, the third proving more stubborn because its host platform required a formal legal request before removal. She did not give any press. She told Andrea to stand down from reactive statements. She went for a run on the property in the late afternoon and ended up, almost involuntarily, at the glass garage. The Ferrari sat in the center of it, not running, just present. She stood at the door for a minute. Then she went in, sat on the floor beside it the way she used to sit beside it in the early years, and leaned her back against the driver's door. The garage smelled faintly of exhaust still, a ghost of Thursday morning. The afternoon light came through the glass in slanted bars. She had not driven it yet. He'd told her to drive it, actually drive it, not in a parking lot. She knew he was right. She had known he was right from the moment he said it. And she also knew, with the specific knowledge people have about their own avoidances, that she was not ready. That readiness for the things that matter rarely comes on your schedule, that you wait for it, and then one day it's there, and you know. It wasn't there yet, but the fact that she was sitting on the garage floor on a Saturday evening, alone, leaning against her father's car, and not feeling like she was being crushed by the proximity, that was something. That was different from a year ago. That was different from 2 weeks ago. She stayed for an hour. Then she went back inside and made dinner. Badly, because she cooked infrequently, and without particular skill, and she burned the onions for the pasta sauce and had to start over with a second onion, and ended up eating something that was edible, but not what she'd intended. And she watched an episode of a documentary series about deep ocean exploration that she'd been meaning to watch for months, and she went to bed at 10:30. It was, all things considered, a better Saturday than she'd had in a while. Monday arrived the way Mondays arrive after significant weekends, slightly surreal, carrying the sense of a world that has continued moving while you were standing still. The fundraising campaigns were down. The torque and tonnage piece had been supplemented by 3 additional major outlet pieces over the weekend, all of them accurate and all of them building the same narrative. The forgotten engineering genius, the devoted single father, the impossible repair, the billionaire who hadn't seen what was standing right in front of her. That last part, hadn't seen what was standing right in front of her, appeared in some variation in almost every piece, and every time she read it, Vanessa felt the particular discomfort of a true thing stated in a way designed to sting. Ethan arrived at 9:15. He parked the Tacoma, which now had a new crack running parallel to the old one in the windshield, as if the glass had made a decision over the weekend to continue falling apart on its own timeline. Lily was not with him. It was a school day, Mrs. Delgado, strict about math homework. He came alone with his hands in his jacket pockets and his hair still slightly damp, and he looked, Vanessa thought, like a person who had not slept especially well since Thursday. She met him at the door rather than having Marcus show him in, which she had thought about briefly and then done anyway, because the alternative, having him walk through the house to her office like a formal appointment, felt wrong in a way she couldn't entirely articulate. "You look tired," she said. "Good morning to you too," he said. "Sorry, come in." "I am tired, you can say it." She led him to the kitchen rather than the office, which was also a decision. Maria had made the full breakfast, as promised. Eggs, not scrambled this time, but poached, which Maria considered the appropriate choice for a formal-ish Monday morning situation, alongside fruit and good toast and the coffee carafe. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and looked at the spread and said nothing for a moment. "She made a lot of food," he said. "She always makes a lot of food when she's fond of someone," Vanessa said. Lily made a strong impression. Lily makes strong impressions. He poured coffee. She asked me this morning if your cook was going to be at the meeting. I told her no, it was a work meeting. She said that was a waste. She can come have breakfast here any time she wants, Vanessa said. And then, because it was true, and she might as well say it, I mean that. He looked at her across the table. There was something in the look. Not suspicion, not warmth exactly. Something more like assessment. The careful reading of a person who had been surprised before by kindness that turned out to have conditions, and was checking for the conditions before accepting the kindness. She understood the look. She didn't resent it. Okay, she said, setting down her coffee. Here's what I'm thinking. I want to be direct so you have actual information, and then I want to hear what you want, because what I'm thinking is only useful if it intersects with what you actually want. All right. I'm considering creating a new position within my company. Not in the automotive division. I don't have one. In the research and development arm, which works on applied engineering problems across several industries. I want someone who understands complex systems integration at a deep level, who can work on problems that are genuinely hard, and who, based on limited but fairly compelling evidence, she allowed the faintest acknowledgement of humor, sees things that other people trained to look for specific things tend to miss. Ethan's expression hadn't changed. He was listening the way he worked, with complete attention and no performance of it. The role would involve mentorship of junior engineers as well as active project work. Compensation would be senior level, which means significantly more than you're currently making. Hours would be structured around a set schedule that I would put in writing, which means you control your mornings and you control the pickup time and any flexibility you need for Lily. She paused. Non-negotiable from my side. The flexibility is real, not the kind that's nominally offered and then informally penalized. He looked at her. How would you enforce that? It goes in the contract, and if it doesn't happen in practice, you leave and I owe you a year's salary. That's an unusual contract term. It's an unusual situation. She looked at him steadily. I'm asking you to trust that I mean what I say. I understand I haven't earned that trust yet. This is me trying to offer something concrete instead of just words. A silence. He drank his coffee. He looked at the table and then out the kitchen window at the property beyond, and then back at her. I'd need to recertify, he said. I know, we'd fund it. It would take time. I'm not going to cut corners on it. I'm not asking you to, and I need to talk to Lily. He said it simply, without preface. Not because I need her permission, she's 7, but because she's been the person this has all been organized around for 7 years. And if her life is going to change, she needs to understand why and have time to adjust to it. She does better when she understands the why. Vanessa nodded. That's good parenting. It's what works for her. He set his cup down. She doesn't like surprises. She's been through enough of them. The kitchen held that sentence quietly. The unspoken weight of it. The original surprise. The one that rearranged everything. Sophie in the delivery ward and Ethan in the parking garage. And a newborn who would grow up knowing her mother only as a photograph and a name, and the stories her father told her in the particular careful way he told hard things. Can I ask you something? Vanessa said. Sure. When you sat in the truck Thursday morning, before you came in, the 20 minutes. She watched his face. A flicker. He hadn't known she'd seen that. What were you doing? He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Deciding, he said finally. Deciding whether to do it. Deciding whether I wanted to go back. He turned the coffee cup slowly on the table. To that part of myself, the engineer part. It's been quiet for a long time. Some things go quiet and you miss them. Some things go quiet and the quiet is actually easier than the noise was. He paused. I wasn't sure which one this was. What decided it? He looked up, something in his face she hadn't seen before, not quite vulnerable, but adjacent to it. The expression of someone showing you a room they don't usually open. I thought about what Sophie would say, he said. She had very strong opinions about me hiding from things that scared me. She said I did it with the good things more than the bad things, which she found annoying. A brief, involuntary thing moved across his face, grief and affection and humor, all tangled together, the way they get after enough years. She would have told me to go in and try. So you went in. So I went in. Vanessa looked at her hands on the table. She thought about her father, standing in the storage unit where he'd been keeping the Ferrari because he was afraid to drive it.
The man who kept love in coffee tins on high shelves. The man who cried openly in a college parking lot and never apologized for it. I think, she said, choosing the words carefully, that the people we lose are sometimes more present in the decisions we make than we give them credit for. Ethan looked at her. Something passed between them. Not romance, not the thing the internet wanted, something more durable than that. A recognition. The quiet acknowledgement between two people who have both been reorganized by loss and are standing in the particular landscape that creates, which is flatter than before in some ways and more vivid in others, and which you can only fully recognize if you've been there yourself. Yeah, he said. I think so too. He ate breakfast. Not quickly, the way people eat when they're nervous and performing composure, but with the unhurried steadiness that seemed to be his natural pace. He had second toast. He told her about Lily's plan to petition Mrs. Delgado for an extension on her science project, which involved a model of the solar system and had run into complications because Lily had decided Pluto deserved to be included and had gotten into a principled debate with herself about how to represent that accurately. What did she decide? Vanessa asked. She's including Pluto and adding a small footnote. He picked up his last piece of toast. She said the footnote will acknowledge the controversy. She's 7 and she's using the word acknowledge. She picks things up fast. He said it with the flat pride of a parent who has learned not to oversell it. Too fast sometimes. She overheard me telling someone on the phone about the press situation this weekend, and she said, "Dad, is this because of the red car?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, people like stories. That's not new." He shook his head. 7 years old. She's right, though. She usually is. It's a problem. Vanessa set her cup down. "So," she said, "is the offer worth thinking about?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the considering whether to answer quiet, but the actually thinking quiet. She had learned the difference over the past several days. "It's worth thinking about," he said carefully. "I need a week." "Take 2. "A week is fine." He looked at her. "One question." "Go ahead." "If I take this, if I come in, recertify, do the work, what happens when things go wrong? Because things will go wrong. I haven't done this professionally in 8 years. There will be problems I don't solve, timelines I miss, moments where the rust shows." He said it directly, without cushioning. "I'm not looking for reassurance. I'm asking what the real answer is." It was, Vanessa thought, the best interview question she'd heard in years. The question that cuts straight to the thing everyone is politely pretending they don't need to know. "The real answer," she said, "is that I'll tell you directly when there's a problem. You'll tell me directly when there's a problem, and we'll fix it without anyone performing competence they don't have." She looked at him. "I don't have patience for the version of professional relationships where everyone is too careful to say the true thing. I've wasted a lot of time on that version." "So have I," he said. "Then we should probably be able to work together." He nodded. Stood up from the table, the way he stood up from things. Functional, no ceremony. He extended his hand across the table. "1 week," he said. "I'll call you." She shook his hand. His grip was straightforward, firm but not performative, the handshake of someone who'd been using their hands for actual work for 8 years and wasn't thinking about how a handshake read. 1 week, she said. He picked up his jacket from the chair back, said tell Maria the eggs were great in the direction of the kitchen, and walked out. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table for a moment after the front door closed. Through the kitchen window she could see him crossing the path to the Tacoma, hands back in his pockets, unhurried. He got in, sat for a moment, not 20 minutes this time, just a regular pause, and then started the truck and pulled out slowly along the drive. Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel over her shoulder, with the expression of a woman who had heard approximately 70% of that conversation and had opinions about it. He took the toast, she said, wrapped in a napkin. He was going to leave without taking it, and I made him take it. For Lily? Vanessa asked. For himself, Maria said. He said he skipped breakfast this morning. She said it in the tone that meant something. The tone of a woman who has been watching people in this house for 9 years and knows what the details mean, and is choosing not to say the obvious thing out loud, because the obvious thing is better left to arrive on its own. Vanessa looked at the place where the truck had been. Make sure we have good melon again on Friday, she said. Maria smiled, turned back to the sink, and said nothing. Outside, the hawk was riding the thermal again above the eastern hillside, moving in long, unhurried circles,
covering the same ground over and over and seeing it differently each time around. He called on a Friday, not the following Friday, 6 days after the Monday breakfast, close enough to a week that it didn't feel like he was making her wait, but far enough that it was clear he had actually thought about it. She was in a meeting when the call came in. She looked at the screen, saw his name, just Ethan now in her contacts, no job title, no property reference, and said to the 3 people sitting across the conference table from her, "I need to take this. Give me 5 minutes." She stepped into the hallway. "I talked to Lily," he said. "How did it go?" She asked 3 questions. A pause, and she could hear the specific quality of his silence, slightly wry, the silence of a parent who has been both impressed and mildly humbled by a 7-year-old. First question, would she still see Maria? Second question, would the schedule change mean I couldn't pick her up from school on Fridays? Because Fridays they sometimes get early release, and she doesn't like taking the bus. Third question, did I actually want to do it, or was I doing it because I thought I should? Vanessa leaned against the hallway wall. "What did you tell her?" "I told her yes to Maria, yes to Fridays, and I told her the truth about the third one." "Which was?" "Both," he said. "I told her both things are true at the same time sometimes. That you can want something and feel like you should do it, and those aren't always opposite." "What did she say to that?" "She said okay, and then she asked if we could get a better toaster because ours burns on one side, but so." He let that sit for a second. "So I think she's on board." Vanessa smiled at the hallway wall. "And you?" "I'm on board." He said it directly, without the cushioning of qualifications. The same way he said everything that he'd actually decided. "I have conditions, though, things I want in writing." "Tell me." "The schedule flexibility, I want it specific, written down with actual hours, not just will be flexible. Monday through Thursday, 7:30 to 4. Fridays, 7:30 to 2:30. Any exceptions require my agreement in advance and come with compensatory time, not extra pay. I don't want to be bought out of my schedule. I want the schedule respected. Done. I want the recertification funded, and I want to do it at my pace. I'm not going to rush a 2-year process into 6 months to satisfy a press cycle." "Agreed. The timeline is yours." "I want it understood that during the recertification period, I'm not available for media. No profiles, no interviews, no, here's how he's rebuilding his career pieces. When I'm actually working, we can revisit, but not while I'm still catching up." "I'll tell Andrea." "Tell her firmly." There was something in that, not aggressive, but the firmness of a person who knows what he's protecting and why. The neighbor who talked to the reporter, the chip situation aside, it happened because I wasn't careful enough about who knew what. I need to be more careful. Lily's already been curious about why people at her school keep mentioning the red car. Vanessa straightened up from the wall. "Kids at her school are talking about it?" "One kid told her the car was worth $1 million. She corrected him and told him it was worth $210,000, which is the number I told her when she asked once, a long time ago." A beat. "I have no idea how she remembered that." "She retains things." "Everything," he said. "She retains everything. It's exhausting." "Ethan." She paused, finding the right phrasing. "I'll keep her out of it. That's not a condition I need in writing. It's just a given." I was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has weight in it, gratitude that doesn't know how to sit comfortably in a sentence. "Okay," he said. "Send me the contract. I'll have it to you by end of day. One more thing." "Go ahead." "I want to do it right," he said. Not perform being back. Actually be back. I'm going to need time to find my footing again, and I'm probably going to have days where I feel like a fraud. And I want it understood that those days are part of the process, and not a signal that I'm failing." She looked at the wall in front of her, at a framed print that had been there since she moved in, and that she almost never looked at directly. Someone climbing a mountain in the distance, very small. She'd bought it at an airport gallery at 32 and hung it, and never really thought about why. "I have those days," she said. "Still, after 12 years. "You do?" "Everyone does. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either very new at their job or not being honest." A short silence. "All right," he said. "Send the contract." She went back into the meeting. The 3 people across the table had the tactful, incurious expressions of people who had been briefed over years to give their employer space for things that aren't their business. She sat down, set her phone face down, and said, "Where were we?" They went back to where they were. The afternoon continued on its track. But something in the day had changed texture. A slight shift, the way light changes when a cloud moves off the sun. Not dramatic, just suddenly warmer. The contract was signed the following Tuesday. There was no press release. Vanessa had made that call deliberately, against Andrea's advice that a managed announcement would be better than an organic discovery. Her argument was that a managed announcement made it a story about her company and her decision, and she wanted this to be, as far as possible, Ethan's own beginning rather than a chapter in someone else's narrative. Andrea had said, "I understand your reasoning and I disagree with it," and Vanessa had said, "Noted," and sent the unsigned contract to Ethan's email. He signed it at 11 p.m. She saw the notification come in while she was reading in bed, and she set her book face down on her chest for a moment and looked at the ceiling. Good, she thought. Just good. The recertification process started in early October. Ethan enrolled in the technical program through a partnership the company maintained with an engineering institute in Pasadena, which meant he drove to Pasadena 2 evenings a week after pickup and on Saturday mornings while Lily was at her soccer league, which she had joined 3 months earlier and which she played with an intensity that Ethan described as slightly alarming for a second grader. "Is she good?" Vanessa asked. They were having coffee in the estate kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-October, which had become a thing that happened now, without either of them formally deciding it would happen. He came by after his morning work. He was still doing some maintenance on the property while the recertification was underway, partly for income continuity, and partly, Vanessa suspected, because abrupt transitions unsettled him and he needed to step from one version of his life to the next, without a gap he couldn't see across. "She's fast," he said. "She's very fast. Whether she's good depends on how you define good. She doesn't always kick the ball where she intends to kick it, but she gets there before everyone else. That's a useful skill. That's what I told her coach." He wrapped his hands around his mug. He didn't seem convinced. "How's the Saturday program going?" "Hard." He said it without self-pity. "There are kids in the cohort who are 23 and they know things I used to know but need to relearn, and they're also faster at processing new material because their brains haven't spent 8 years focused primarily on scheduling logistics and pediatric emotional support. You're faster at some things than they are. Sure, at things that come from experience, at knowing what to look for, at reading a system, at the practical side. But the theory," he shook his head, "it's like a muscle I let go cold. Takes longer to warm up. Are you keeping up?" "I'm keeping up." He looked at his coffee. "Not gracefully, but I'm keeping up." This was a version of honesty that Vanessa had come to expect from him, and still slightly surprised her each time. Most people, asked how something was going, defaulted to a performance of competence even with people they trusted. Ethan defaulted to accuracy. It was both refreshing and occasionally uncomfortable, the way real things tend to be. "I have something to ask you," she said. She'd been sitting on it for a week, moving it around, checking it from different angles. "All right, the Ferrari." She looked at her coffee. "I want to drive it. The real drive, not the property road, not the parking lot. The hills." She paused. "I've been thinking about it since you told me to. I told you that a month ago." "I know. What's changed?" She thought about that, about the evenings in the garage, about the incremental thing, the slow, unconvincing way grief retreats, not in a wave but in small measured reversals, giving you back access to rooms you'd locked off one at a time, on its own schedule, regardless of whether you feel ready. "Nothing specific changed," she said. "I just think I'm ready now." He looked at her, the reading expression, the one that evaluated without performing evaluation. "When?" he said. "Saturday, if you're not in Pasadena." "I'm done by noon." "Saturday afternoon, then." "Okay." He said it the way he said things that were actually significant, without inflation, without signaling that he understood the weight of it. Just okay. As if the size of a thing didn't require special handling. She appreciated that more than she could easily articulate. Saturday was clear. One of those October days in the hills above Montecito when the light has a different quality than summer, cleaner, more angled, with a bite in the air that the summer warmth had softened. Vanessa was at the garage at 1 in the afternoon. She'd spent the morning being normal. Email, a call about a board matter, a run on the property. And she'd tried not to make too much of the afternoon in her head, because the things you inflate in advance have a way of collapsing under the weight of what you've built around them. Ethan arrived at 1:15, which was slightly late, and came through the side gate slightly out of breath, jacket half zipped, with a small piece of Lily's soccer jersey still visible as a bright orange thread caught on his sleeve cuff. "Sorry," he said. "Game ran over. She scored." "She scored?" "She did not intend to, but she scored." A brief, involuntary grin, the real kind, unguarded, the one that reached his eyes and made him look younger by about 5 years. The ball went off her knee and into the net, and she stood there looking at it for a full 3 seconds before she understood what happened. Then she started screaming. "That counts," Vanessa said. 100% counts. He unzipped his jacket fully and looked at the Ferrari. The grin faded into something more measured, but not less real. "You ready?" "I think so." "Keys are in it. I checked it over this morning. It's running well." "You came by this morning?" "Early. Didn't want to find a problem when you were standing here ready to go." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said things that were considerate without wanting credit for being considerate. Vanessa looked at the car. The afternoon light was hitting it again the way it sometimes did, that almost painful red, the color of something that refused to be subtle. She thought about her father at 61, buying this car because he'd been looking at pictures of it since he was in his 30s. The boy's giddiness in his voice on the phone. "Nessa, I did something." She walked to the driver's door. It opened with the same solid, deliberate click as before, and she lowered herself in, and the smell came up to meet her. Leather and aged rubber, and the deeper thing, the one below language, the one that lived in the part of her she could never fully inventory. She sat with it for a moment. Let it be there without rushing through it. Ethan got into the passenger seat. She looked at him. "You're coming." She hadn't assumed. She'd been planning to go alone, actually, had pictured it as something solitary, a private reckoning. "You're taking a 37-year-old Italian car into the hills for the first time in 5 years," he said. "I'm coming. In case it breaks down." "In case it breaks down." He pulled the door closed. "Also because, I don't know, it seems like the right thing to do." She didn't argue. She started the engine. The sound of it was different inside the car than standing outside. More intimate, more physical, the vibration coming up through the seat and the wheel and the floor under her feet. She sat with it running for a moment, hands on the wheel, and felt the thing she'd felt before, but now warmer, fuller, more real. The car was alive. The car was actually, genuinely running. After 5 years and $11 million and 19 failed attempts, and one early morning in September, with a man who listened to it like it was trying to tell him a secret. "Okay," she said quietly. She put it in gear. They went out through the estate's east gate and onto the access road, and Vanessa drove carefully at first. Not tentatively, but with the deliberate care of someone who respects a machine they're still getting the measure of. The Ferrari was responsive in a way that was slightly startling, the steering precise and communicative. The engine doing exactly what she asked of it, with an immediacy that made modern cars feel padded and approximate by comparison. After 2 miles on the access road, she turned onto the Hills Road. It curved up through the oak and eucalyptus in long, sweeping bends, and the afternoon light moved through the trees in broken patterns across the hood, and the Ferrari's engine opened up as she gave it more room. Not fast. She wasn't going fast, not yet. But moving. Actually moving through the world with the windows down and the smell of the hills and the sound of something she had been trying to hear again for 5 years. They didn't talk for the first several miles. It was a comfortable silence. Not the silence of people who have run out of things to say, but the silence of people who are both inside the same moment and don't need to annotate it. The hills rose on either side, golden brown in October, and the road curved and fell and curved again. Eventually Ethan said, "How does it feel?" "Like his." She said it without planning to. The truest answer available, which was not an engineered answer. "It feels like his." "Good. Is it supposed to feel this small inside?" "It's a Testarossa. It was never designed for tall people. I'm 5'7". And yet, he stretched his legs slightly into the footwell. "Your father was shorter than you?" "By 2 inches. He always said it fit him perfectly." She paused. "He said the first time he sat in it at the dealership, it felt like the car had been built for him specifically, like they'd measured him before they designed it. That's how it's supposed to feel. Does it feel that way to you?" He looked out the passenger window at the hills. "I haven't been in anything like this in 8 years, he said. "It feels fast, even not going fast." "It does. It feels like it wants to go faster." "Yeah." She felt it. The engine's underlying impatience, the sense of something restrained, ready.
I'm not ready for faster yet.
You don't have to be. They came around a long left bend, and the view opened. The hills falling away to the south, the Pacific glittering in the distance, the afternoon light turning the whole thing into something that looked slightly too beautiful to be casual about. Vanessa let her foot ease off slightly, not fully stopping, just slowing to let it register. My father never got to do this, she said. I know. He drove it twice in the parking lot. She shook her head. He was so careful with it. He didn't want to scratch it, didn't want to put too many miles on it. He treated it like it was made of glass. She was quiet for a moment. I used to tease him about it. I told him what was the point of having something beautiful if you were too scared to use it. What did he say? He said some things are worth being careful with. A beat. I thought he meant the car. Ethan turned from the window, looked at her profile. He meant you, he said. It wasn't a question. She felt the sentence land somewhere deep and specific, in the territory that grief guards. Yeah, she said when she could. I know that now. She drove. The road descended for a while and then climbed again, and the Ferrari handled the changes with the easy authority of something designed for exactly this. Hills, curves, an engine that wants to be used. She started to go a little faster on the straights, not recklessly, but more genuinely, letting the car do what it wanted to do rather than holding it back. The sound changed when she gave it room, deepened and opened, less restrained, more fully itself. There it is, Ethan said quietly. She knew what he meant. Tell me about Sophie, she said. She hadn't planned to say it. It arrived the way the true things arrive, on the back of another true thing, without asking permission. Ethan was quiet for a moment, a long enough pause that she almost took it back, almost said you don't have to. But she didn't, because she'd learned over the past several weeks that his silences were not deflections. They were thinking. She was loud, he said. Not rude. She wasn't rude, but she took up the space she was in. If she was in a room, you knew she was in the room. He looked out the window. I was pretty quiet before her. I was always kind of quiet. But I was quiet in a way that was about keeping a low profile, not drawing attention. She thought that was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. Did she change you? She told me I needed to stop acting like being invisible was a virtue. He turned the cup holder in the center console absently, a small fidget. She said I had things worth saying and I was choosing not to say them because I was afraid of being wrong in public. Was she right? She was almost always right, which she was fully aware of and used extensively. The almost smile again. She was an architect. She designed public spaces, parks, community buildings. She had very specific ideas about how physical space should make people feel. She used to walk through a new space and tell you within 5 minutes what it was doing wrong emotionally, what it was communicating that it didn't intend to communicate. What was she like with Lily? She never met Lily. He said it simply, but the simplicity cost something. The complication started before Lily was born. By the time Lily arrived, Sophie was already gone. He looked out at the hills. Lily knows her from photographs and the things I tell her. She has questions sometimes that I don't always know how to answer. A pause. She asked me once if Sophie would have been strict or lenient. I said strict about the things that mattered, lenient about everything else. She said that sounded exactly like me. I said, yeah, I think I picked it up. Vanessa said nothing. She drove, and she let him have whatever the hills and the speed and the October light were doing for him in that moment. After a while, he said, your father. Tell me something about him that isn't in the story people tell. She considered. He couldn't cook anything that required more than one pan, she said. He was completely confident about this. It wasn't that he'd tried and failed. He had simply decided that one pan was the correct approach to food preparation, and that anything requiring more was an unnecessary complication. Ethan laughed. Actually laughed, openly, not the almost smile. What did he make? Eggs. Always eggs. Scrambled, fried, occasionally an omelet if he was feeling ambitious. He could also make sandwiches, which technically don't involve a pan. What about actual meals? He ordered out, or his regulars at the shop brought him things. There was a woman named Dorothy who brought him a casserole every Tuesday for about 12 years. He swore he had no idea why she kept bringing them. Did he know why? He absolutely knew why. He was a terrible liar about things that involved other people caring about him. His face did things he couldn't control. She paused.
He looked exactly like Lily does when you tell her the melon is all gone. That combination of knowing what's happening and not knowing how to handle it. Ethan looked at her. You noticed that, he said. I notice things, she said. It's a professional hazard. The road leveled out into a long straightaway with the hills on the left and an open vista on the right, and Vanessa let the Ferrari go. Not recklessly, controlled, deliberate, fully intentional, but fast. Properly fast. For the first time, the engine opening up to something that was not politely restrained, and the sound of it was enormous and alive, and she felt it in her spine and her sternum and somewhere behind her eyes. She held it for maybe 20 seconds, then she brought it back down. Her heart was going faster than it should have been. Her hands on the wheel were steady. He would have loved that, she said. Yeah, Ethan said. He would have. They turned around at the end of the road, where it T-boned into a larger route, and she drove back slower, taking the bends at the pace they deserved, not rushing. The light had shifted in the half hour they'd been out. Lower, more orange. The kind of afternoon light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is, or perhaps exactly as significant as it is, depending on your philosophy. When they got back to the estate and she pulled the Ferrari into the garage and cut the engine, the silence was different from the silence that had lived in this garage for 5 years. Fuller. Less like an absence. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment. Thank you, she said. For what? For coming. She looked at the steering wheel. And for fixing it. I know I said that before, but I mean it differently now than I did then. How differently? She thought about it. Then I meant thank you for solving the mechanical problem. Now I mean, she paused, I mean thank you for understanding what it was actually about. Because I don't think you treated it like a car. I think you treated it like what it was. I was quiet for a moment. I knew what it was before I started, he said. You told me. The way you talked about it. 5 years, $11 million, 19 teams. Nobody does that for a car. They do that for something else that a car is holding. She nodded. They got out. The garage was warm, the engine heat radiating into the enclosed space, mixing with the smell of exhaust and oil and the California afternoon coming through the now open side door. Vanessa leaned against the car and looked at it from the outside. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Yes? When you were driving just now. He was looking at the car, not her. The fast part. What were you thinking? She considered lying. Or rather, considered giving the edited version, the one that was true but not fully true. The version you give when you're not sure yet whether the full truth will land right. She decided against it. I was thinking that he'd been so careful with it, she said. So careful about not using it, not risking it, keeping it perfect. And I thought, the thing I was so careful about is gone anyway. It's been gone for 5 years, and being careful didn't preserve it. She looked at the deep red paint, the white interior just visible through the driver's window. So maybe the point was never to be careful. Maybe the point was always to use it. Ethan looked at her, the reading expression, but softer than usual. Yeah, he said quietly. That's it. They stood for a moment in the warm garage, the engine ticking as it cooled, the afternoon outside going toward evening. It was Maria who broke the silence, appearing in the garage doorway with her dish towel and her impeccable timing, holding a phone out to Vanessa. Your CFO, she said. He says it's not urgent, but it's urgent, Vanessa said, because it always was. She took the phone and walked toward the house. At the garage doorway, she paused. Monday, she said to Ethan. First day of the actual job. Not maintenance work, the actual job. I'll have your workspace ready. He looked at her from beside the Ferrari. Monday, he said. She went inside. Ethan stayed in the garage for another minute, which she could see on the security monitor when she passed through the hall. Just standing beside the car, looking at it with his hands in his pockets. Not analyzing it, not diagnosing anything, just looking. She had seen her father stand like that, she remembered. In the glass garage in Harwick, on the evenings he would wander out after dinner for no particular reason, just to be near it, just to confirm it was there. She went to take her call. Outside, the California evening settled over the hills, patient and enormous, indifferent to human scale. The hawk was gone from the thermals. The eucalyptus moved in the last of the day's warmth. And in the glass garage on the east side of the property, a 1987 Ferrari Testarossa.
Cooled slowly in the dark, still smelling of the road it had finally, after 5 years, been allowed to know. Monday arrived with marine fog sitting low on the hills above Montecito, the kind that burned off by 10 but hung heavy in the early hours, turning the estate's tree line into suggestions rather than shapes. Vanessa was up at 5:30, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that she stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes drinking her first coffee without opening her email, which Maria noted but didn't comment on, which was itself a form of comment. Ethan arrived at 7:22, not the Tacoma this time. He'd had the windshield replaced over the weekend, and the new glass gave the truck a slightly startled expression, like a face after unexpected surgery. Lily was not with him. School day, Mrs. Delgado, the ongoing solar system project, which had evolved over the past 3 weeks into something that Ethan described as a research document with scale models, and which had apparently required 2 trips to the hobby supply store for materials to represent the outer planets accurately. He had a bag with him. Not his worn red toolbox, a different bag, a messenger-style canvas thing that looked like it had been purchased recently, still with the crease lines from folding. He was wearing different clothes than Vanessa was used to seeing him in. Not a suit, nothing formal, but actual clothes instead of the maintenance uniform. Dark pants, a charcoal Henley, a jacket. He looked, she thought, like himself, but with the volume slightly turned up. Not costumed, just present in a different way. He stood in the front hall for a moment when Maria let him in, taking in the house the way you take in a place you've been to several times but are arriving at differently. Vanessa came out of the kitchen. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." He looked down at the bag, then at her. Something in his face. Not quite nerves, but the adjacent thing. The low-level electricity of a person standing at the beginning of something they have wanted and are still not sure they deserve. "Where are we going?" "East Wing. I had a workspace set up." She started walking, and he followed. "It's not the main office floor. That's downtown. This is a satellite setup, primarily for focused project work. You'll be on site here 3 days a week while the recertification is ongoing. The other 2 days, remote. You're keeping me off the main floor. I'm keeping you somewhere you can actually work without fielding questions from staff who've read about you and want to have a conversation about it." She glanced back at him. "Once the news cycle moves on, we'll revisit the location. Right now, the downtown office would be a distraction. For them or for me? Both, honestly." The East Wing workspace was a large room with good natural light and a long work table she'd had brought in, along with 2 monitors, access to the company's internal research systems, and a whiteboard that ran the full length of one wall. The Ferrari was visible through the window at a diagonal, the glass garage catching the morning light from this angle, the red paint just visible inside. Ethan stood in the doorway looking at the whiteboard. "That's a lot of whiteboard," he said. "You seemed like a whiteboard person." "What makes someone a whiteboard person?" "The way you work. You think spatially. You needed to see the whole system to find the fault. People who think spatially use whiteboards." He looked at her. "You've been analyzing me. I run a company. I analyze everyone." He set his bag on his work table, unzipped it, and took out a notebook. A regular composition notebook, not a premium leather thing, with a blue cover that had a coffee ring on the upper right corner. He set it on the table with his laptop, which was older than everything else in the room by about 4 years. "I'll need a newer laptop," he said. "Mine can't run the modeling software. I will have one here by noon." "How did you know I'd need it by noon?" "Because you're going to spend the morning orienting yourself in the systems, and by noon, you'll be trying to model something." He looked at the whiteboard again. She could see it happening, the slow activation of something that had been dormant, the way a room feels when the lights come on after a long dark. Not dramatic, quiet, like a machine remembering its purpose. "All right," he said. "What's the first project?" She handed him a folder. He sat down and opened it, and she watched his eyes start to move across the page. Fast, then slower, the pattern of a person who reads quickly until something stops them. She gave him 3 minutes before she spoke. "Applied integration problem," she said. "We're consulting for a transportation infrastructure company on an electrical management system for a new generation of hybrid rail vehicles. The system has a cascading failure pattern that their internal team can't isolate. The diagnostic behavior is consistent," he said, not looking up. "Yes." "Which means the cause is fixed." He turned a page. "You gave me this on purpose." "I gave you what needed solving." He looked up from the folder. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before, the specific alertness of a person encountering a problem that matches the shape of their mind. Not excitement performed for an audience. The real thing, private and functional, the look of a person who has just been handed exactly the right tool. I'll need the full diagnostic logs, he said, not the summary reports, the raw logs. I'll have them sent over. She left him with this folder and went to her own work, and she did not check on him until noon, which required some discipline but felt important. She had managed enough talented people to know that the worst thing you could do on a person's first day of real work was hover. You handed them the thing, and you got out of the way. At noon, she knocked on the open door. The whiteboard was covered. Not fully. There were still large blank sections, but one corner had a branching diagram in black marker that was dense and intricate, and that she could not entirely parse, but that clearly represented someone thinking very hard about something with their whole brain. Ethan was on the phone. He held up one finger without looking at her and continued the call. No, I need the full logs from the October 6th test cycle, not the summary. The summary was written after someone had already formed a conclusion. I need to see what was there before the conclusion. A pause. Yes, all of it. I know it's large. I need all of it. He hung up. That was the transportation company's chief systems engineer, he said. He thinks the problem is in the power distribution module. He's wrong. How long have you been on the phone with him? Since about 9. He looked at the whiteboard. The problem isn't where they've been looking. The distribution module is showing symptoms because something upstream is sending it bad information. That pattern, he pointed to the branching diagram. That's the same behavioral signature I saw in the Ferrari. Different system, different application, but the fundamental logic is identical. Something is failing, and the instruments are only seeing the failure's effects, not its location. Vanessa looked at the whiteboard for a moment. Day 1, she said. It's an obvious pattern if you know what to look for. 11 engineers at that company have not found it obvious. 11 engineers were looking at the distribution module because that's where the readings were anomalous. He turned back to the table. The readings being anomalous there is the whole point. That's how these systems mask their failures. They look loud in the wrong place to distract from the quiet in the right place. He paused. I need the laptop. She called it from the doorway. The laptop arrived at 12:20. By 1 o'clock, he had the raw diagnostic logs open and was moving through them with the focused, unhurried intensity she had first seen in the garage in September, the absolute attention that didn't perform itself. By 2 o'clock, he had circled 3 entries in the October 6th log with a red pen and written 3 words in the margin of his notebook, which she could see from the doorway but couldn't read. She brought him coffee at 2:30. He said thanks, without looking up. She went back to her own work and sat with the particular satisfaction of having made a correct decision. Not the loud satisfaction of a public win, but the quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing you saw something truly rather than conveniently. It took him 4 days. 4 days from the first Monday to the moment he knocked on her office door on Thursday afternoon and said, I found it. The failure origin was a sensor integration fault in the vehicle's primary control unit, hidden beneath 2 layers of diagnostic abstraction that the company's internal testing protocols had been systematically misreading for 16 months. His report was 31 pages, clear, technically precise, with diagrams that he'd drawn partly by hand and partly in the modeling software. And at the end of it was a step-by-step remediation protocol that he'd tested against the simulation model 3 times before writing it down. The transportation company's response, delivered to Vanessa's operations director by their CEO, was, who is this person, and how quickly can we put him on retainer? Vanessa replied that he was unavailable for retainer work at this time, but that they were welcome to continue the consulting relationship through her company's standard terms. She told Ethan this at the end of Thursday. He looked at the report on her desk and said, was the diagnosis right? Their team ran it against the physical system. It was exactly right. He nodded. Not with the expansive relief of someone who needed vindication, but the small, private nod of a person confirming something to themselves. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. I need to pick up Lily, he said. Of course. He was at the door when she said, Ethan. He turned. You did good work, she said. She said it the way she said things she meant, without cushioning or inflation, just the plain thing. He looked at her for a moment. It felt good, he said, and then, it felt like something I forgot I could do. He left. She sat at her desk and listened to his footsteps recede down the hall, and she thought about what it costs to carry a self you've set down for years. The weight of it is strange in both directions. The weight of carrying the old version, and the weight of picking it up again and finding it heavier and lighter simultaneously than you remembered. She thought about her father at 61, buying a car he'd wanted since he was 30. The years between the wanting and the having. What you pay for that distance. She picked up her pen and went back to work. November brought 3 things in close succession: the first rain of the season, Lily's 8th birthday, and the formal press announcement of Ethan's position at the company. The rain came first, arriving on a Tuesday night and settling in for 4 days, turning the estate's grounds dark and fragrant and making the hills behind the property disappear behind low cloud. Vanessa found she liked the estate more in the rain. It felt less like a display and more like a place. The birthday was Lily's, and it was not Vanessa's event. She had not been invited, and she would not have expected to be. But on the Friday before the birthday, she had asked Ethan what Lily wanted, and Ethan had said books. She always wants books. Specifically the 3rd volume of a fantasy series she'd been waiting for since August, which kept getting delayed at the bookstore he'd ordered it from. Vanessa had Andrea locate 3 copies, 1 for Lily, 2 for backup, and had them delivered to Ethan's apartment on Wednesday morning with a card that said, "Happy birthday, Lily," from Vanessa. P.S. The braids still have character. She had agonized briefly over whether the P.S. was the right call, and then decided that Lily would appreciate it more than formality, which turned out to be correct, because Ethan texted her on Saturday morning with a photo of Lily holding all 3 books and grinning with the specific abandon of a child who has received exactly the right thing. And below the photo, Lily had clearly grabbed the phone and typed, "I gave the extra 2 to my friends because sharing is important. And I read the first chapter already, it's so good." Vanessa looked at the photo for a long time. She saved it to her phone, which was not something she did with photographs normally. The press announcement was the most controlled of the 3 events, and also, paradoxically, the ones that created the most noise. Andrea had written it carefully. 3 paragraphs, plain language, no hyperbole. It named Ethan's role, referenced his professional background at Meridian, noted his contribution to the Ferrari diagnosis, and said nothing whatsoever about Lily or his personal history or anything that touched the human interest territory the media had been circling since September. The media circled anyway. This time, though, the circling was different. The initial story had been about the improbable repair and the overlooked janitor. This story, the formal hire, the senior level position, the company's investment in his recertification, had a different weight. It was slower to build and steadier when it arrived. The think pieces that followed were not the breathless real-time kind, but the considered kind. The kind that take 3 or 4 days to be written by people who have actually thought about what they want to say. Those pieces said things like, how many Ethan writers are there? How many people with significant talent are working in positions that render them invisible because life required them to step away from the version of themselves that their talent belonged to? How much of what a company thinks it knows about who its employees are is actually just a reflection of what those employees were hired to do? Vanessa read every one of them. She was not mentioned in most of them as a protagonist. She was mentioned as a catalyst, which she thought was probably more accurate. One piece, a short one, written by a columnist she'd been reading for years, said something that she cut out and put on her desk. It said, "The Ferrari story is not about a car that got fixed. It's about a woman who stopped looking past the people she'd already decided weren't worth looking at, and a man who had been patiently, quietly present the whole time." The question it raises is not about Ethan Ryder. It's about who else is standing at the gate right now, in our own lives, carrying something we haven't thought to ask about. She left it on her desk for a month. Then she framed it and put it in the hallway, where she would walk past it every morning. The initiative launched in January. She had been thinking about it since October, since the drive in the hills when she'd said, "I've spent years surrounded by powerful people while overlooking extraordinary ones standing right beside me." Not out loud, not in those words, but in the private version of the thought that had been running under everything since September. She had been sitting on it and shaping it and asking herself whether it was a genuine institutional commitment or a response to public narrative, and she had decided that the distinction mattered less than the execution. If the thing was real in practice, the motivation was secondary. She called it depth hire. The concept was straightforward, which was intentional. She had seen enough corporate initiatives collapse under the weight of their own complexity to know that simplicity was not a virtue. It was a survival requirement. The program identified positions across her company's operations: maintenance, logistics, security, support, administrative, and created a formal pathway for internal candidates in those positions to have their full professional and educational background assessed for advancement opportunities unrelated to their current role. Not a mentorship program, not a scholarship. An actual structural reassessment of what the people in those positions knew and could do, regardless of what they were currently being paid to do. The first cohort was 43 people across 6 company divisions. Among them, a security guard who held 2 master's degrees and had spent 6 years in academic research before a family crisis required him to leave and take work with a flexible schedule. A logistics coordinator who had practiced as a licensed pharmacist for 8 years before her licensing lapsed during a period of homelessness she had spent 3 years climbing out of. A cleaning staff member at the company's San Francisco office who had been developing a machine learning framework in his personal time for 4 years, and who, when asked to explain it to the company's technical team, left 3 senior engineers sitting in respectful silence for 20 minutes. None of these people were exceptions. That was the thing Vanessa kept saying, in the internal announcements, in the board presentation, in the interview she eventually gave Andrea permission to schedule with a business publication whose editor she trusted. These are not exceptional cases, she said in the interview, sitting across from a journalist she'd known for years, in her office downtown. That's the point. If 43 people in the first cohort of one company turn out to have backgrounds and capacities that their job titles didn't reflect, the question isn't why are these 43 people unusual? The question is why did it take this long to look? And the answer? The journalist asked. We only look at people through the frame we gave them when we hired them, she said. We're not bad at recognizing talent. We're bad at recognizing it when it's wearing the wrong uniform. The journalist wrote it down. The quote ended up as the headline. Ethan read it in the break room of the East Wing workspace on the morning the piece ran, holding his coffee with both hands, the way he always did when he was reading something that required actual thought. He didn't say anything about it to Vanessa when she came through an hour later, but he had torn the page out and folded it and put it in the back pocket of his notebook, which she noticed but didn't mention. Spring came gradually, and then all at once, the way California spring tends to arrive. A few warm days, a cold week, and then suddenly everything is blooming at the same time, and the hills are green for the brief window before the summer turns them gold again. The estate's grounds changed with it, the gardens doing the things gardens do in April, and Lily had started coming by on Friday afternoons after early release because Ethan picked her up on his way from the office, and because Maria had established a standing Friday tradition of making whatever Lily requested, which changed weekly and had included, in the preceding months, quesadillas, soup that Lily described as the orange kind, French toast at 4 in the afternoon, and once, memorably, a request for those fancy eggs from the first time, which Maria had interpreted correctly as poached and executed with the patient dignity of someone who does not find any reasonable request beneath them. Lily was not a quiet presence in the house. She was not loud exactly, but she filled space the way her father had said Sophie did, with an unself-consciousness that made the rooms feel more inhabited. She spread homework across the kitchen table and had opinions about the documentary series Vanessa was watching, and once, discovering the library on the second floor, spent 45 minutes in there alone and emerged with 3 books under her arm and the expression of someone who had found something they hadn't known they were looking for. Can I borrow these? She asked. You can keep them, Vanessa said. That seems like a lot. They're books. That's what they're for. Lily looked at her. You have a lot of books you haven't read, she said. Not accusatory. Observational. I buy them intending to read them. That's called an aspirational library, Lily said. I read about it. Vanessa blinked. Where did you read about that? I don't remember. I read a lot of things. She tucked the 3 books more firmly under her arm. I won't judge you for it. Dad buys things he doesn't use too. He has a bread maker still in the box. That's different. It is different, Lily agreed. The bread maker just takes up space. The books are also decoration. Ethan, appearing in the library doorway at this point, said, You're being very opinionated in someone else's house. She said I could keep 3 books. I'm being grateful with commentary. That's not a thing. It is now. Vanessa looked between them, the familiar rhythm of it, the call and response they'd developed over 8 years of just the 2 of them, the language a parent and child build between themselves that is entirely their own and slightly impenetrable to outsiders. She had watched this dynamic from the outside for months. and found it consistently, unexpectedly moving in the way that private things are moving when you're allowed proximity to them. She thought sometimes about what she had almost missed. If she had not been standing in the garage on that September afternoon, if Dr. Court's team had not been loading out through the same door that Ethan's maintenance route passed, if she had not made the dark joke, maybe you should fix it, out of frustration and exhaustion and the specific humor of someone who has stopped expecting anything good. The margin was that thin. It is always that thin. That was the thing she had been slowly understanding since September, the lesson that arrived not as a revelation, but as a gradual accumulation of small observations, the neighbor who talked to the reporter and set the story in motion. The 20 minutes Ethan sat in the truck deciding. The way Lily said that seems lonely in the kitchen, and Vanessa had said she's not wrong, and the honesty of that moment had cleared something in the air between all of them. Life turns on these small fulcrums, the things that almost didn't happen, the route someone almost didn't take, the question someone almost didn't ask. She thought about this on a Sunday morning in late April, sitting in the glass garage with her coffee and the newspaper she rarely had time to read on weekdays. The Ferrari was visible to her left, parked at its usual angle, the morning light already doing the thing it did with the red paint. She had driven it 4 times since October. Once alone, twice with Ethan, once, on a Saturday in March, with Lily in the back seat, who had insisted on wearing sunglasses she described as appropriate for the vehicle, and who had spent the entire drive asking questions about how the engine worked, that Ethan answered in careful, calibrated detail while Vanessa drove. On that drive, stopped at a viewpoint above the coast, Lily had looked out at the Pacific and said, "My mom never got to do anything like this." The car had gone quiet. Ethan had turned in his seat. Vanessa had looked straight ahead at the water. "No," Ethan said. "She didn't. Do you think she'd like it?" "She'd have hated how loud the engine is," he said. "She was very sensitive to sound, but she'd have liked the view." A pause. "She'd have liked Vanessa." Lily had considered this. Then she'd said, "How do you know?" "Because she liked people who said true things instead of easy things." He had looked briefly at Vanessa when he said it, and Vanessa had kept her eyes on the water but felt it. "Vanessa does do that," Lily said. "She does." "Sometimes it's annoying," Lily added, "but mostly it's good." "Most true things are annoying sometimes," Ethan said. Lily seemed satisfied with this and had gone back to the view, and after a moment Vanessa had started the engine again, and they had driven back along the Hills Road with the sound of the Ferrari filling the afternoon, and nobody had said anything else about it, and the silence had not been sad. On that Sunday morning in late April, sitting in the garage, Vanessa set down her coffee and looked at the Ferrari for a long time. She thought about her father at the storage unit, afraid to put miles on something he loved. She thought about the coffee tin on the high shelf, the note inside it that she had never read and never would. She thought about a 4-year-old who learned that things could disappear in February without explanation, and grew up into a woman who built herself walls at the same time she built companies, and who had gotten very efficient at both. She thought about what Ethan had said about Sophie. She said I needed to stop acting like being invisible was a virtue. She had her own version of that. Not invisibility. She had never been invisible, had built a career out of being seen, had learned to occupy public space with competence and authority. Her version was different. Her version was being present without being reachable, standing in the room while keeping the room at a distance, managing the proximity of other people the way you manage a risk, with systems and protocols and the careful, professional warmth that communicates. "I'm here without communicating, you can come closer." She had been managing that distance for a very long time. The door at the side of the garage opened at 10 o'clock. Ethan came in with 2 coffees, his own and a fresh one for her, which meant he'd been in the main house already, and Maria had given it to him, which meant Maria had seen his car and had the coffee ready, which meant the logistics of Sunday morning had quietly reorganized themselves around a new normal without anyone having formally decided that was happening. He sat down on the overturned bucket he'd been sitting on the morning she found him working. He handed her the coffee. He looked at the Ferrari. "You're in here a lot lately," he said. "Is that strange?" "The opposite of strange." He wrapped his hands around his cup. "For most of last year you avoided it." "I know." "What changed?" She thought about the honest answer. "It doesn't feel like his absence anymore," she said slowly. "It started feeling like just the car, just itself. Something he loved that I can love separately, not as a monument to losing him. Ethan nodded. He understood this. She knew he understood it because he had lived his own version of it, had arrived at his own version of this same threshold at some point in the 8 years since Sophie. At the moment when grief stops being the primary fact of a thing and becomes one of many facts, still true, but no longer load-bearing. Lily wants to know, he said, if she can learn to drive in it when she's 16. Vanessa looked at him. She's 8, she said. She's a planner. I tell her we'll discuss it when she's 15. She'll absolutely hold you to that. I know. That's why I said 15 instead of 16. She looked at the car. She can learn in it if she wants, but she learns how it works first, mechanically, before she touches the wheel. She'll love that. He said it with the calm certainty of a father who knows his child completely. She'll want to know everything. She always wants to know everything. Yeah. He looked at his coffee. The morning was warming outside, the marine fog already burning off, the hills emerging from behind the cloud layer. She asked me something last week, he said. She asked if we were a family. The garage went quiet. Vanessa did not move. What did you tell her? She said carefully. I told her I didn't know exactly what word we were, but that some things don't need a word before they're real. He looked up from his coffee. His expression was the open one, the one that took effort, the room he didn't usually show. She said okay. She said she was going to use the word anyway, just quietly, to herself. Vanessa looked at him. There were several things she could say. She was aware of all of them. The careful ones, the ones that held the distance, the ones she'd spent years being fluent in. The managed version of proximity. The professional warmth that says, I am here, but not you can come closer. She said, what word do you think she's using? Ethan held her gaze. I think she's using family, he said. The garage was warm. Outside the hills were clearing, going green and gold in the April morning, and somewhere on the south grounds, Maria was probably already thinking about what to make for lunch on the assumption that there would be 3 people eating, because Maria had been running this house for 9 years and understood the difference between what was happening and what anyone had formally announced. I think that's the right word, Vanessa said. It was not a sweeping declaration. It was not the kind of moment that arrives in movies with music underneath it and perfect light. Ethan's coffee was slightly too hot still, and one of Vanessa's jacket buttons was missing, and the folding chair she was sitting on had a wobble in the left rear leg that had been there since September, and that nobody had fixed. But it was true. And between people who had both spent significant portions of their lives in the company of untrue things, grief that got dressed up as function, distance that got dressed up as independence, talent that got dressed up as unavailability, the true thing, even small, even plainly delivered, landed with a weight that the large gestures never quite managed. They sat in the garage a while longer, finishing their coffee, not filling the silence because it didn't need filling. The Ferrari sat between them and slightly ahead, pointed toward the door, toward the road that went up into the hills. Later that afternoon, all 3 of them drove it. Lily sat in the back with her sunglasses on, asking questions about torque and gear ratios that Ethan answered, and that she immediately stored away in whatever part of her that kept everything. The part that had remembered the Ferrari's purchase price from a single conversation years before. The part that would remember this day in the specific way children remember the days that shape them without knowing, at the time, that they are being shaped. Vanessa drove. She took the Hills Road, the one she and Ethan had taken in October, and she went through the same bends at the same patient pace. And when she reached the long straightaway, she let the Ferrari go, properly this time, with full intention, the engine sound opening up into something enormous and alive. Lily said, from the back seat, "Oh." Just that. Oh. The sound of someone encountering something real for the first time and not yet having the language for it. Ethan looked at Vanessa. She looked at him briefly, then back at the road. She drove. The hills went past. The Pacific appeared at the horizon. The light was doing what the light in that part of California does in late April, which is something no photograph ever quite captures. Warm and angled and clear. The kind of light that makes everything look like it's being seen for the first time. She thought about her father on Route 9 with the Ferrari in the parking lot, driving slow loops and gripping the wheel and beaming. The boy he still had in him at 61, the things he had been so careful with. She thought, I'm using it, Dad. I'm using it. Not recklessly, not without care, but fully, properly. With her whole attention and her whole heart, the way beautiful things deserved to be used, the way life deserves to be used, without the small, fearful economy of someone who is saving themselves for a safer moment that never arrives. The road curved back toward the hills. She stayed in it. When they got back to the estate an hour later, Lily climbed out of the back seat and stood in the driveway with her sunglasses still on, looking at the car with the expression of someone taking an internal inventory. "I'm going to learn how engines work," she announced, "properly, not just the basic stuff." "I know," Ethan said. "Will you teach me?" "Some of it. Vanessa knows some things I don't." Lily looked at Vanessa. "Will you teach me the parts he doesn't know?" Vanessa looked at this 8-year-old with her slightly crooked braids and her sunglasses and her 3 borrowed books, and her quiet, absolute certainty that the people around her were resources to be learned from, not authorities to be managed. "Yeah," she said. "I will." Lily nodded. "Good." She took her sunglasses off. "Can we eat now? Maria said something about the orange soup." They went inside. The Ferrari sat in its glass garage in the late afternoon, cooling slowly, the red paint holding the last of the day's light. It would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and on the Saturdays when Lily came by to learn about gear ratios, and on the evenings when Vanessa sat beside it with her coffee, and on the future days that had not yet arrived and could not be predicted, only moved toward. It was not a monument anymore. It was just a car. A beautiful, particular, breathing car, with a new ground path and period-correct wiring, and a story that had passed through grief and stubbornness and $11 million. And one September morning, when a man sat in a truck for 20 minutes deciding whether to go in. Years from now, if anyone asked Vanessa what the Ferrari meant, she would think about all the ways to answer. The easy answers, the true but partial ones, the version the press had told, and the version she told herself in private. And she would say what she always said, which was this: the car was never really about the car. It was about what happens when you stop looking past the people you've already decided you've seen and actually look. It was about the things that grief holds in trust for you until you're ready to carry them differently. It was about a man who sat with her silence without trying to fill it, and a girl who said that seems lonely without softening the truth, and the long, imperfect, necessary work of building something real from the materials that remain after loss. It was about the fact that the most important doors in a life are rarely the ones you plan to open. Sometimes they're the ones you pushed open with your shoulder on your way to somewhere else, not knowing what was on the other side, not knowing you were ready, going in anyway.